Good morning or good evening to wherever you are. G'day, guys. Robert's in the house. G'day, Robert. Good to see you, mate. What's this stream about? Just chewing the fat. Oh, well. Just general stuff, general Q&A, mate. Just the general sort of stuff. As usual, I didn't do a specific, occasionally I'll do something like a special of one sort or another. I was going to do the Corona thing, and with all the sort of nonsense. And later this year, I was going to do, my opinion on, the climate thing as well. But thanks, Lukey. And thanks, Richard. Yeah, so I was going to sort of do something that along those sort of lines. But with all the sort of shenanigans now with YouTube and all that, talking about, the sort of cancel culture type attitude that they're employing towards people that are content providers. We actually produce the content that basically they can advertise, put their commercials on, and they don't produce anything. We produce it. And they're treating us in a very shambly way, and threats and all sorts of things. So obviously my channel's much smaller, so it's sort of probably flying below the radar. But, given time, it'll become more noticeable, and then it may be a different story altogether. So, yeah, it's really not a good thing. Yes, exactly those overlords, precisely, Lukey, they definitely can't. Raymond, good to see you, mate. Hello, Harut. Harut's very early today. Good to see you, mate. So there's no concern with estrogen from consuming dairy because it was too low, precisely. I think I made a comment. Carl actually asked that in Bart's video, and I said, like a large glass of milk has 6 nanograms of estrogen, when males produce every day 53,000 nanograms of estrogen, and women well over 600,000. I think it's about 630,000. So basically, it's minuscule. A lot of this is sort of, it's just nonsense that people talk about. Milk's got a lot of things. Not only estrogen, it's got a lot of things, IGF, and there is a peptide transporter that can actually bring in very minuscule amounts of IGF-1 as well. Again, irrelevant compared to the amount that the human body produces on its own. Just having a steak, or even just having sheer very little, So it's crazy how these myths are created out there in nutrition, but that's what all they are. I usually go, use first principle, use just common sense. Go back 100 years. People were consuming way more of these things, and disease was next to non-existent. So how can we be consuming less now and have more problems due to these things? It just doesn't make logical sense, because evolution doesn't change that fast. Evolution is much slower, So you may have epigenetic changes over a number of generations, but evolution in terms of actual DNA changes take much longer. So, yeah, a lot of this sort of is just nonsense, just people repeating the same nonsense over and over again, and it gets traction, and then nobody remembers exactly. You have to sometimes go back. I usually go back to studies like with the biotin issue. Somebody actually commented and asked me about biotin and said, raw eggs. And I said, well, in nature, people consume raw eggs, so it's not an issue. So why would it be an issue now when it was an issue back then? There was a study back in 1920s. They talked about what they call egg white injury. that's when they were feeding rats. I think it was rats, or was it dogs? I can't remember. It was an animal, one of the animals. They were feeding them. It could have been a dog. They were feeding it egg whites, and it basically, no, it was a dog. Now I remember it. And they basically were inducing a biotin deficiency, sort of scaly skin and stuff like that. And, you were getting all this, what you can get from biotin deficiency. And what they realized is that the adavine basically will bind a certain proportion. There's a formula. I'd have to go back to see the study. It's actually a special formula that you can actually apply, and you can actually work out when you do have a whole egg, it only binds 27%. Because yolks have a lot of, far more biotin. And so it only can bind 27%. And because the eggs generally have far more, you're actually going to be getting more biotin than less, even the small binding effect. So again, a study done in an animal a long time ago, and it was very on whites, raw whites, not whole eggs. And then it just took a life of its own. So when you tell people about raw eggs now, they say it's going to give you a biotin deficiency. No, it's not. It just causes a 27% binding effect. That's all. You still get far more than you get from many other foods. So it gets a life of its own, which is an unfortunate situation. What happens over time, So, yes. Anyway, let's move on. You're welcome. Not a problem, mate. The Vagoons will tell you the opposite. Dairy fairies, blah, blah, blah. Exactly. They make up shit all the time. They don't even know the components, even when they talk about IGF-1, which is very minuscule, they don't even know that there is a peptide in the milk that actually does transport a very minute amount. But again, it's irrelevant when the quantities. They're pretty much ignorant about a lot of the things. And they don't realize that basically when you go back, a lot of the beneficial effects of dairy were great, in terms of the gut mucosal, all these sort of things, beneficial bacteria, the B vitamins that are in there, especially riboflavin, which is really important if you've got MTHFR issues, all these sort of things, because it actually upregulates those enzymes, which basically fixes the homocysteine issue, But unfortunately, with all this nonsense and demonization that's actually happened, it has stuck to some extent with a lot of people. That's why we've seen dairy consumption come down, in particular milk, in younger children, which probably need it far more than even adults, which is unfortunate. Lactoferrin, very important in binding lectins and keeping them out of the enteric system, out of your gut system, and basically helping you. So another reason why we've got far more problems with lectins nowadays than what we had in the past. So there's a lot of reasons why we've really just bastardized the food and really altered things to such a radical way. Yeah. So yes. I'm finally on time. Good to see you, Helen. Yeah, that's true. Sometimes you're here very late, or sometimes not at all because you sort of missed the stream. But yeah, thanks for being here. I appreciate it. I wasn't the one asking, but you are correct. Even if there is estrogen, so the orally, okay, it's minute. It's 6 nanograms. It was a new car. Oh, sorry. If I did, yeah, I do apologise. But thanks for being here. Sometimes in the thrill of answering, I have the male problem of basically just blurting out rather than actually engaging the mind of, where it came from. So do apologise about that. I'll use that because I think that was the excuse Pim used with Bart. So I'll use that. I'll take that. Best excuse ever. Why not use it as a male? Yes, she did okay. She definitely did. So it seems to appear in some of the Brazilian low-carb movement streams, female nutritionists invite me over to appear as guests in one of the YouTube streams in Is it the, I suspect, is it the estrogen stuff, Lukey? Do I live nearby? No, I'm very far away. I live in Tasmania. He lives in New Zealand, different country. Actually, the funny thing is, in the Constitution of Australia, New Zealand is actually written in the Constitution. They were a colony, a state at the time, declared a state eventually by the British Crown. And they had the option of joining the Federation, the Australian Federation. So the Australian Federation would have been much bigger. But it never happened. They decided not to do an act of parliament, which would basically make them join Australia. So they never did. But we do have a very close relationship. We're practically, one country in a sense. How close we are, and populations move between the two. So, I mean, even Bart's part Australian on his family side. So it's pretty much, we tease each other. They tease us about, kangaroos and stuff like that. We tease them about sheep. We have a bit of fun. They tease me about being a two-headed monster down here in Tasmania. I get the Tassie devil thing, all that. It's all in good fun. All of, water off a duck's back. It's good fun between us. I think we're pretty easy and pretty easygoing, a lot of us in this part of the world. So we don't get too wound up about things. Probably we haven't had a long enough history to basically be fighting over things. That's probably the reason. Not a bad thing. Have you ever seen a huntsman over there? I've seen all sorts of. I actually nearly stepped on a redback. That's a very nasty one. They usually actually around toilets. Can appear in little, like if you've got like a backyard area and all that, they do appear. It was actually the one that I actually nearly stepped on wasn't in a toilet. It was actually, I had like the property that I owned years ago, I had a shed in the back. It's just down the road from where I am now, but I had a shed in the back that I was actually clearing out all the equipment. And there and behold, as I moved one of the boxes, out popped a redback, and I nearly stepped on it. So I moved away and allowed it to go on its merry way. So, yes, I don't like snakes, but I have no. I'm a friend of the arachnids. Yes. Harry, I believe you have MDFR or some issues with folate because of ancestral, which indicate adaptation. Yep. You're also talk about the Irish, Scottish people have beta carotene conversion issues. Yep, I do. Very much so. MTHFR. Thanks, Deborah. Appreciate that. I'll just cover this quickly, Deborah, and I'll get to you. Now, as I said, I've done a video which actually covers this. MTHFR is basically an enzyme that needs to be, that is under, it's sort of, when you have those SNPs, as they're called, single nucleotide polymorphism, you tend to basically, those enzymes don't work as well, or are on, if you're on a species inappropriate diet. But if you're eating meat, which is very high in riboflavin corrects the whole issue. So it is a highly prevalent thing, and it's pretty much because our ancestors did consume. Sometimes some of us were not super carnivores, but hyper carnivores. And when you get into hypercarnivory, you're getting so much riboflavin that you can basically downregulate that pathway, because you're getting so much bees, you're eating organ meats, you're getting folate and all that, so you downregulate that. But it can be corrected with riboflavin. So, and again, the same thing with cod liver, the Irish, getting too much retinol, they had to downregulate the beta carotene conversion thing. So again, all these things, especially islander populations, tend to have this. Coastal people, those sort of people. So there are all these adaptations. And there's a lot of humans that do have it around the world. Remember, most of our ancestors lived along rivers and coastlines, not interior. When we develop civilization, agricultural civilization, we actually create surpluses and equipment to be able to penetrate into tundra, into forest, dense forest, by cutting it down, basically. That's when we were actually able to move interior into the land far more. And that's what the archaeological evidence does show. We primarily, most of our settlements were along waterways or coastlines. Anyway, so that's the sort of adaptations, dietary, fish, blah, blah. So do include a bit of fish in your diet. It's a good thing. Get your DHA and EPA. You still need those essential fatty acids. Yes. People also clearly can tolerate dairy, which is another adaptation. Yep, exactly. Yeah, we've got an adaptation for the last 5,500 years. I think it may be a bit more for some. It depends on the population. It does depend on the population. There's a lot of question marks on lactose tolerance, so there's a lot of that. So the literature is still highly problematic. Deborah, thank you. Sodium versus salt versus sodium. I was having a convo with Jonas von der Planet followers. He claims that there are two different things. Salt is bad. He's an idiot, absolutely idiot. Sodium is a constituent part of salt. And in order for us to actually, we need two things that actually increase and improve the actual acidity of our stomach to be able to absorb meats. One is chloride, which is in salt, the sodium chloride, the chloride part, and the other thing is taurine. So we basically need salted water, which we get in blood of animals, because that's where traditionally a lot of the tribal people got. That's why they drink blood, to get the electrolytes. That was the purpose of that. And basically, and also populations also consumed certain organs because they were very high in sodium, and they also consumed seawater in some cases to basically when they were deficient. Actually, in the Papua New Guinean highlands, they actually even went to war, and there was cannibalism involved in trying to get salt. And actually, the people on the coast would actually provide fish and salt to those inner land people in order to basically placate them and reduce their warlike behavior towards the coastal people. So no, it's very important. Otherwise, you have difficulty digesting a lot of things. It's probably one reason why these people consume raw meat, because when you've got low sodium, you tend to basically slightly have, like you can have a pH of 2.5 or whatever, slightly not as acidic, and still sort of absorb more of the raw meat than you would. You're never going to absorb it to the same level. And I think that's why they get sort of relief and stuff like that. So I think it's just garbage. 1.5 million years ago, we started cooking meat. And if you look at all tribal people, they cook their meat. And so when you've got aged meat, because when you kill an animal, it ferment, you'd get certain bacteria, you need to have very low pH. So in that regard, populations basically, had to have these things in their diet. So blood was important to get the certain sodium levels. Now, you don't have to basically consume like sodium every day, in that regard. You can get it from small amounts of different, and populations did vary differently. They just sort of listen to their body. I mean, sometimes I will salt my food more than other days, depending on, if I basically salt food and I can't taste the salt, I go, I need more. Sometimes I can taste it and go, I probably don't need as much, and I'll scrape some off my steak. So really it's just listening to your body. And sodium is very important. It's very important in the mitochondria for energy production. It's very important in a lot of functions throughout the body. So to say that you don't need And salt is one of the good sources. Now, there is a difference between table salt. That means, processed crap that has got a lot of fillers, a lot of caking powders in there, a lot of other things. Now, even those are very small in quantities. They're not going to really, compared to people eating junk food, high carbohydrates, and a whole lot of other crap, the amount of caking agents and all these other things is so minor that the negative effects are going to be next to nothing. Your body can handle far more toxins in the environment than that minor stuff you'll get from table salt. But it's always good to get a good sea salt, because you're going to get basically also a lot of the other trace minerals, which are also important. Trace minerals are cofactors in a lot of enzymes. So that's another reason why, by having trace minerals, by having, those sort of sea salts or salts from like the ones that I get from salt lakes, the old salt lakes out in the sort of desert type environments. That's where I get mine primarily, because it's much older, cleaner in terms of microplastics and stuff like that. Not that in the southern hemisphere you've got a lot of microplastics, very minimal, so it's not really an issue down here. It's usually in the northern hemisphere more of a problem. But even in the northern hemisphere, in some areas, the way they actually do it in the traditional way, a lot of that sort of stuff is drained out. So even there, it's not really an issue that much. Especially if there are a couple of websites that do talk about the different microplastics and they've actually identified those. I just can't remember the link. I'll try and find it and I'll actually post it. But it's really a non-issue. These people make a big fuss. The reality is we've been consuming salt for a very long time as a species, and it's never been a problem. Just because it's associated now in the modern world, that's because we're eating a whole lot of other crap. Basically, sunspots are basically associated with a bad diet. Everything's associated, because you can associate anything. Ice cream sales with shark attacks, significantly associated. You can associate anything with anything. The question is whether that association is strong in terms of strength. So does it fulfill the Bradford Hill criteria? None of it does. I haven't seen one study to show that. So it's garbage. Listen to your body, how much sodium or salt you want to consume. It's a non-issue. As I challenge these people and say, well, show me the evidence. Not the garbage, studies, because I can go back and look at early studies and there's no issue there whatsoever. It's only these modern studies where you've got where salt becomes an issue with very high carbohydrates, high insulin. This is how ridiculous it is. Even somebody like Walter Kempner, who did the studies back in the 1930s that came out of Germany. I did a chat on the dietary stuff, the dietary guidelines with Pim Johnson on her site, a chat, and it's in one of my chat playlists. And I actually talk about this actual study. And he realized that you had to take all the electrolytes out. Not only sodium, all the electrolytes out, because you've got this massive water retention from high carbohydrates and high insulin effect that actually causes this. So you can only supplement iron, and you can't sustain this for a long time without health problems. He knew you could use it for his specific type of intervention with kidney issues, but he wasn't aware of ketogenic diets at the time, or the Randall cycle, because that wasn't published until 1963. So nobody was aware of these sort of other approaches, so to speak, which are actually more successful and better. It's really the mixed diets that actually create too many growth pathways and factors and don't allow. Even fasting can help clear a lot of garbage out of kidneys and all sorts of things. So and these sort of diets, if you think about it, because they're very much like a vegan diet, more or less. It's sort of a fasting mimicking diet. That's what it is. That's what gets those sort of results. But it's not sustainable. You can't fast forever, basically. But look, a lot of these people are just talking nonsense. Sodium, if salt wasn't a good source, well, you could go back to blood, but not most people are not going to do that. And for thousands and thousands of years, people have been using salt on and off in different parts, or using blood, depending on what's available in their environment. But I've never seen a problem, because even blood, when you consume, you're going to get all the different elements that you'll find in salt. So, whether you get it from salt or you get it from blood, you're still going to get the sodium chloride, the other trace minerals. So what's the difference? It's coming in a different package. The body can utilize it. So we've never seen anybody do a study showing that it doesn't or can't. So it's pretty much nonsense. When I usually challenge these people, they always go back to the sort of nonsense stuff about, all their claims about that it's never really been in our diet or stuff like that. And I go, well, we've always accessed sodium chloride and trace minerals through blood or other sources in the environment, or fish or coastal water, stuff like that. So there are many tribal people that drink coastal water for that purpose, to get enough salt when they've actually much lower. So these things have been happening for a very long time, and these people just ignore the selective, just to basically run their own little agendas, which is unfortunate, but that's how it goes. Hope that sort of covered it, my rant. Thanks again. And Trouble's in the house, which is good to see you, Trouble. Oh, goodness. Here's Harry talking about New Zealand. For an ancient constitution, you wish you had a slice of this nice country, mate. They're very protective about their sheep. I've noticed, when you actually say, well, we'll appropriate that, don't touch our sheep, is what comes across there. Oh, here's the insult. I was waiting for this one. Thanks, Richard. Was it about the time that Australia was a penal colony, Harry? Actually, Tasmania was one of the biggest penal colonies and producers of food for the colony in basically Sydney Cove. It was actually, most of the food was supplied from Tasmania, the Central Highlands part of Tasmania. And in the Central Highlands was the majority of the wealth, both the gentry and a lot of others. And they were actually building these towns there, and they wanted the capital to be in the centre of Tasmania. But it never happened, because the governor was in Hobart with his military and said, nah, this is where the government's going to be. I'm in charge. Pretty much he got his way. It's, you can control the economy, but sometimes if somebody controls the military, they can actually get their way. And that's what happened. But yes, we were a penal colony, and yes, we're double-headed down here as well. Yes, we get it chopped off at birth, the other one, that is. Yes, I do miss it. My bro was bit by a red back, but he was okay. Oh, look, I've heard about people being bitten and not dying, but I've also heard the opposite as well. It probably depends on people's immune systems, how good they are, their vitamin D status. All these sort of things seem to correlate. That nobody's ever done any studies, because obviously you can't give people a species appropriate diet, vitamin D, and all these other things, and then bite them, get them bitten, and to see who lives and who dies. I mean, it's just unethical. It's the sort of stuff that Adolf used to do in the 1940s in Germany, but you can't really do it anymore. There's what is called the Nuremberg Code. Oh, apparently you can. I forgot. Politicians are doing it all the time, mandating experimental jabs. There you go. You can do it still. I wonder when we're going to get Nuremberg trial for the Nuremberg Code number 2. Will that ever happen? Or will it just be swept under the carpet? Likely. Phoenix compilation. Good to see you, mate. G'day. My brother has been having long-term COVID symptoms on days. He eats significant carbs, and that doesn't help. He's been told megadosing thiamine for 10 days can help. Anything else that could help? I've talked about ivermectin. I've talked about vitamin D, and taurine can have a benefit as well. He probably needs more of taurine anyway. It has an anti-inflammatory effect within the heart, because you can get long COVID symptoms and some inflammatory effects in the heart, and taurine can deal with that. Eat more meat. Oh, apparently that will help as well in the heart. Very high in taurine. I believe so. I'm just being facetious. Yeah, so thiamine can be a rate limiting thing, and people are probably not getting enough, but you do need, it's not enough to, just shove a whole lot of thiamine in there. You do need, NAD as well to be supported for energy production. And that means, adding, the niacin part. Oh, I wonder which food has both those. It's bacon, isn't it? And pork. High in thiamine, high in niacin. I wonder whether sun, salt, pork, bacon, Yes, unfortunately, a lot of people just are not. Yeah, they just want the pill. Give me a pill. Give me a jab. Give me this. As I said, vitamin D's. These are coronaviruses. Coronaviruses of all sorts, common cold, the flu, or whatever. The way you deal with it successfully is with a good vitamin D status, period. And most of the research has shown that quite clearly whenever it's been done, good intervention studies. And I've talked about the Spanish one. Nobody ended up in ICU or anything. The low vitamin D status is crazy nowadays. All that garbage about dangers of UV, which was nonsense because we were eating seed oils and eating inappropriately and making ourselves more vulnerable to skin damage. Also, niacin is protective against, what is it protective against? UV radiation. So why aren't we eating more lard and pork like we used to do in the past and not have this problem and be able to walk outdoors and not have a problem? I wonder why. So we've just bastardized the food supply to such a level and altered things to such a level. And then we expect all these sort of miracle pills to solve everything. Well, they don't. If we're eating a species appropriate diet and doing things, we're not going to have a lot of these problems. So, but we don't. Getting out in the sun is really important, guys. I can't, don't stay indoors. People stay indoors for far too long. You're harming your body. You're harming your musculoskeletal structure, your gut lining. That sun out there is your best protection. Get out in the sun. Find a way to get out in the sun. I don't know. Cut a hole in your roof, and put a skylight that you can actually open up to get some sun. Get sun on your body. It's really that important. And eat appropriately, which means eat a steak. Anyway, make sure enough magnesium, B1 activation, if that's the direction he's headed. Yeah, well, you can eat species appropriate, which have all these great nutrients, Richard. But yes, a lot of people are eating kibble and sort of have become reliant on having to get all these micronutrients from supplements. If you combine all the supplements that people buy and the cost, yes, they do have they are useful in dealing with deficiencies as a short term, taking a good amount of them. I'm not against supplements in that way, but constant supplementation is not necessary, and it's costly. It's cheaper to basically eat a bloody steak and some eggs and stuff like that, and organ meats, which are hot, super dense in all these B vitamins, in the minerals and everything else. Crustaceans, all sorts of sources which are way healthier for people and come in the right combinations that people need. Supplements don't necessarily always, and sometimes they can have other things, like, you get a B complex and you got, folic acid, and there's a good proportion of people that can't convert it to folate. And then you've got, and so it can become a problematic thing that if it builds up in the body, it's not a good thing. There's a lot of side effects. And then you've got things like cyanocobalamin, converts to cyanide in a lot of people. It does with me because I've got the genetics that I need, proper B12 from animal foods. Or if I'm going to use it from a supplement, it has to be methylcobalamin, but that's more expensive and it's not in general supplements. So there's a lot of people just get, using trash when you can actually just go and get some liver, and it's a superfood, a super supplement. You see the tribal people, they organ meats, they cut small bits of liver, they hand it out to each other, have it raw, and basically get their multivitamin for the day. Yeah, I think we've got a lot of things back to front in today's world, unfortunately. I hate snakes. Spiders, I've even had them walk on me. Me and my younger sister, I know, evil little children, we used to pluck their legs and throw them in the toilet for fun. My mother wasn't impressed, let's put it that way. But snakes, I've had a bad experience when I got chased by a snake in Greece. One's a curl and pop. And I went past and started, and it started chasing me for a while, for a couple of 100 meters, and then it sort of gave up. But it scared I was a very young child, and sort of left, let's say, an impression on me, a psychological impression, a psychological scar. So I tend to get really, when I see a snake, I get, a bit, I'm not terrified or anything like that. I've nearly walked on a second. I've walked past a snake or jogged past a snake. So I'm not that, but, they unsettle me. Let's put it that way. I tried to get used to them by working myself up to holding them, but I still really don't like them. Fair enough. Don't have to like everything. Hate ants more. You're a mouse. Don't you eat ants, Richard? I couldn't help myself. Trouble. COVID. Yes. Hope you bros feel better soon. Yes, we do hope. He does. Oops, I've just lost my... Thank you, StreamYard, for just flying off the handle, as you usually do. Consistent, this platform, consistent. Helen B. reminds me of spray by shed. Oh, leave those nice spiders alone, Helen. Yeah, I know, women hate spiders. Mira saw a spider once, and she basically screamed her head off. Oh, get rid of it, kill it. Settle down, woman. I mean, God almighty. She was like a little, frightened child, all over the place. God. I was tempted, and I go, no, I'm not going to do that. Let's throw it on her. I go, no sex tonight. No, not doing it. We were having a good day, so, we'd gone to the beach and all that, so I didn't want to ruin it. Harry, do you think it's a good idea to eat multiple times a day? Definitely not. Stimulates muscle protein synthesis. No, it doesn't. Leucine does. See my video that I did on leucine. It's leucine. Even in a fasted state, you can actually infuse leucine in and you'll still get muscle protein synthesis. Absolutely nothing to do with multiple meals. How much time do you think ideal? So if you're trying to gain weight, I would be looking at muscular weight. It's actually more protein and lifting weights. That's what's going to give you more weight in terms of muscle weight, because that's the sort of weight you do want. Now, you can spike that a bit, like cheat, like getting a leucine supplement. It's sort of what I recommend to people that are, like people that are sarcopenic, or people that are osteoporotic and stuff like that, like older people that, maybe relatives of yours, and you bloody have hard time to actually convince them to eat enough meat. Best way to do is supplement them leucine and spike their muscle protein synthesis that way. Probably helps them more. So you could basically get a leucine supplement. Your insulin to glucagon, if you're on a species appropriate, will still be about 1.3, so you don't have to worry about insulin. It's a signaling molecule in terms of muscle protein synthesis. It doesn't drive it. It's leucine that drives it, even in a fasted state. Go and see my video. And so that's really what you want, not multiple meals. And it's not a good thing. You don't want to be continuously in this sort of spiking all day. You want basically your body to, like our ancestors did. I mean, they went out, they hunted, they were hungry. They'd get a bit of glucose from that cortisol spike and initially that morning dawn effect. They'd get a bit more free fatty acid flowing in their bloodstream. They'd be energized. They'd get out there. They'd kill that animal. They'd, have a bit of blood. They'd have cut a bit of liver off, have their multivitamin, and then they'd walk back to cook the remainder and share it amongst the other members, and they would feast on that all afternoon. And then they would relax and go to bed and try and repeat the same thing the next day. We're not designed to basically be constantly eating. Also, within the small intestine, what will happen is if you eat a lot of protein, it will just slow down the process. Peristalsis will just slow down. So you'll actually absorb over more hours. So, and that we've done the studies. I've talked about them before, and I've actually shown some stuff in some other live streams. But we've actually, where people will have this massive amount of meat, and then or eggs, like the old bodybuilders used to do, steak and eggs, big steak and egg stuff. And you'd basically just get that being absorbed over 6 to 8 hours. So it takes longer, but it still gets absorbed. You still get these aminos coming in, the muscle protein synthesis happening over a longer period of time. You actually get an extended muscle protein synthesis, not just an acute like you would get from whey supplement, and then it drops off. And you have to really get it in, the whey supplement, within that 90 minutes, because that's the most sort of time when it will take that anabolic hit the strongest after you've exercised heavily, to failure, and that's when it'll actually work. So, and then the rest will be these smaller spikes throughout a number of hours as you're basically absorbing that stuff. I mean, even in a fasted way, most people don't realize it's a pulsatile. You go into autophagy, you clear out all the junk, organelles and all sorts of stuff within the cell. They get out into the bloodstream. Enough proteins, amino acids into the bloodstream will actually spike, signaling molecules, mTOR, a number of these things, and you will basically then push that into muscle protein synthesis. And if you were cheating by throwing in a leucine, even in a fasted way, you'd actually push that into more muscle protein synthesis than what you would normally. So, but anyway, but that would reduce the amount of autophagy you would get. You'd still get some autophagy, but you would reduce that by doing that because of the effect on the anabolic pathways. But it would only be for that short amount of time, and it would only be probably when you did do that sort of spiking effect, you'd get that initial effect for probably about 90 minutes, and then that would drop off, so it wouldn't really impede autophagy too much in that regard. But yes, it's still a protein. it still would have that effect. It would cut it off for quite, and in some people, if they've got other issues, it can cut it off for far more, and depending on how much you do as well, which is another thing. But it's just basically, it's not that I encourage that, but I'm just saying that, your body will go through this pulsatile effect even when you're fasting. So there's still some muscle protein synthesis that can still happen, but it's a very low grade. You're still in a catabolic state. It's a very low grade of recycling. But pretty much it's leucine, always has been, always will be. And the rest is pretty much nonsense, Harut. So I usually have 2 meals a day. Bart has 1. If you're more physically active, you're lifting weights and all that, make it 3, space it out into 3. Try and do it, if you're spacing it out, try and do it within a sort of like a 10-hour. So at least you're still getting about 14 hours of time-restricted feeding, which is a good thing. Because that's going to be, if you're getting time-restricted feeding, it's still going to be better. It's closer to the ancestral approach of waking up, having no food, and literally going out and having to find your food, rather than sticking your head in the fridge the moment you wake up. Not a good idea, especially as cortisol is spiking in the morning to give you that boost and that energy. You don't want to add any more. That's why I usually start my first meal about 10:30, 11, usually 11 most of the time. Danger. Watching now. Likes ratio imbalance detected. Oh, I better stick this in there. Please hit the like button. Yes, thank you, Richard, for reminding me. Yes, it's that button at the bottom of, just go click. It's all you have to do. If you don't like me, just go dislike as well. I'm equal opportunity in that regard. If you're a Vagoon in the area, you can dislike me. I don't mind. I won't be offended. That too. Yes. I would eat fish about every day if it wasn't for the mucked up waters with heavy metals. Fair enough. Yeah, look, I'm in the southern hemisphere, which is really, really good. If you can get from the southern hemisphere snap frozen fish, do buy it. I know it's hard to find that sort of stuff. It's a bit of a pain. But our ancestors also always, even I remember doing the ancient Greek thing on the isotope analysis, the N15, the highly carnivorous ancient Greeks. And it actually showed quite clearly that there was, majority was ruminant, but there was also some coastal fish in there as well. So small fish like sardines, stuff like that. Sourcing is important, unfortunately, in today's world. The waterways aren't as clean as they used to be. And yes, and that heavy metals can be a problem nowadays, unfortunately. It's also a problem with a lot of people with their, inability to excrete a lot of this because of, poor bile production, lack of taurine. Oh, I wonder what. Oh, yeah, that's right. Meat provides taurine to basically allow the bile to flow better, so you don't have a gallbladder issue. And as a consequence, you can actually excrete also some of these heavy metals. Yes, damn, meat really works, doesn't it? I've got to be facetious about these sort of things because it's just so funny. And actually, seafood is even higher in taurine than red meat. We talk about red meat being high in taurine. Yes, it is. But some of the seafood is even higher. It's probably one reason why those Japanese, you hardly hear these sort of stories about issues of that sort in Japan. I wonder why. It must be all that fish and all that taurine. Must be doing the trick. Yes, great food. Yes. Actually, our prices of our oysters went up recently. COVID actually made everything expensive. Yes. So it's about 50 cents extra for each oyster that I used to buy for 2. So keeps on bloody going on. Yep, scallops, great stuff. Had some recently. They were very nice. And they had the Royon. Yes, they were complete scallops, locally Tasmanian from Margate in the south. Is very nice. So, is anything to be concerned amongst the vaccinated during this winter? Let's hope supply issues don't escalate. Unless it's Novavax, HD, some of us need to travel like me. I mean, and we need they're only getting in Australia about 15 million, which is concerning. I'm going to go out in there with a club. I demand my Novavax. Anybody touch my Novavax and I'll club you. I'll do the old Neanderthal, the sort of. I've got a bit of Neanderthal in me. Just kidding. Yeah. It's a crazy. Look, the reason why I'm concerned about vaccines in younger people. Now, a lot of people said, well, a mate of mine said I'm contradicting myself because I did say that a lot of the new variants that were actually appeared earlier in the piece had nothing to do with vaccines, and that was true. They had nothing. A lot of these originated in a lot of third world countries around the world. But what has happened is these variants and these new variants are more. They tend to spread much easier and they've become more mutagenic. That means they seem to mutate much easier than before. That's an issue. Like the Delta strain now seems to basically where the early mutations didn't actually. So if we had allowed it to run through the population with herd immunity and just protected the elderly and vulnerable, what we would have had is we wouldn't have had this sort of pressure where we isolated. That isolation actually created evolutionary pressure on the virus to change. And now it's become a variant like the Delta and offshoots of the Delta that seem to be able to mutate much easier. So they've picked up material potentially from other viruses as viruses do, and that material allows them to alter some of their protein structures in order to basically circumvent the immune system and survive, especially when they're under evolutionary pressure. You're trying to wipe them out is what happens. And especially, coronaviruses are more prone to this, where other viruses are less. That's why we've been able to eliminate other viruses, because they don't mutate very easily. They're very, like hardwired nearly. Where coronaviruses, which is the common cold, the flu and all that, tend to, under evolutionary pressure, tend to mutate much easier. And that's where the problem lies. And now that we're actually vaccinating younger and younger kids and all that, what we're doing is we will end up applying more evolutionary pressure amongst those young kids that have got stronger immune systems. And because of stronger immune response, the viruses need to adapt to basically survive. And so you actually create evolutionary pressure. And depending on people's genetics and whatever else is in their system, which the virus can exploit, similar protein structures, and so it can actually borrow things from other viruses. So as I said, we all have different microbiomes. So what that may die in me, it may evolve in someone else because of the different material that exists in there that it can exploit within its environment in the human. So basically, it's very hard to predict how this is going to play out, but I do worry that it's starting to acquire mutagenic and evolutionary characteristics of the common cold and the flu. I can't be 100% sure, but it is concerning. Let's put it that way. And that's why I've sort of have concerns about this sort of the level of, now we're going into boosters and boosters upon boosters and whatever else. Whether that's a good strategy, I think, is a very poor strategy. We should have basically prioritized these to the more vulnerable people and left everyone else to basically just get it. Like you get the sort of like people got SARS back then and people end up with lifetime immunity. I don't think this is a good strategy that we're approaching, and there are a number of voices that have actually echoed this in the virology field. A number of virologists have said this. The problem is they're not being listened to because the politicians and the bureaucrats are basically running shotgun over anybody that disagrees with them, because they are ideologically bound to this. They're tied to this. Their political careers are tied to this. It's not a conspiracy. It's just basically when people are invested in something and their paycheck comes from that investment, why would they oppose it? It's not in their best interests. It's just selfish interests of humans that we tend to get these, ridiculous policies. People commit themselves to things, and even though they're wrong, they've been proven wrong, people just still push the same barrow because they've got an interest in it. It's just a ridiculous way humans are, but that's what we've got. Politicians that are invested in the narrative, and pulling back could cost them political votes at the next election. Bloody crazy world that we live in. Another reason for direct democracy. Get rid of these idiots. Anyway, let's move on. Harry, my question was that you see all these adaptations. So how can you say they aren't adaptations to eat well-prepared grains, etc., blah, blah? Look, humans have an ability. Let me just wind back. When we look at basically tribal populations like the Sand people, the Kalahari, the Bushmen, they have some of the oldest genes of the human species, Homo sapiens sapiens. So all of us broke off that common gene pool, and all the other Africans are basically have broken off from that, and we have broken off from the Africans. Got it? So the oldest sort of type was this much tannier, brown tannier type complexion that you see with the Sand people. They have some of the most oldest genetics of the human species. I've actually done, if you go and check my chat with one of my chats with Bart, they consume 3.92 grams of protein on average, sometimes even more than that on average per day. So they are very high protein eaters. They don't consume any grains or anything like that. Their amyloids, their ability, amylase, their ability in their salivary glands are very low. They are basically what we inherited and we've kept because, it's like vestigial tissue, where you've got tissue in there. You don't use it anymore. It's like, in Wales where they've got the legs, but they're just tucked in, but they're still there, all those structures, because once they used to walk on land, no longer. They went back to the sea. So we still have these vestigial organs and all sorts of things, but or adaptations and stuff like that. It doesn't mean that species is appropriate. Our gut has changed. Our cecum went away and became very small. The only reason is why in the modern populations, these amylase have been upregulated in the last 5,500 years in a number of populations around the world is because they're always there. They were downregulated because we're on a species appropriate diet. And that's what the N15 data shows. And then all that's happened is we've basically in the last 5,500 years, we've basically upregulated them again. That doesn't mean, but that's for glucose and starch. That's not for grains. I mean, in the environment when the mega beasts vanished, we switched to some tubers and stuff like that, seasonal starch and some fruit, because we needed extra energy. We couldn't get enough energy. And it's also allowed us to fatten up by engaging the Randall cycle. We didn't understand it, but that's what we were doing seasonally and building up fat stores to be able to survive through the winter, the leaner periods of the year. But grains are definitely not. You have to basically ferment them. Like Dad did lentils recently, and I did have some when I was over at his place. So, and I have to say, it's one of those things that I do like, but I haven't had it for a very long time. So he hadn't done it for a very long time either. So I had some, but yes, take my Carney card away from me. And not that I give a shit, but basically he fermented those for a whole week. They were so soft and all the chelating factors are being broken down. Do you think most people do that nowadays? No. So yes, you can basically prepare them in a certain way and all that. I don't say we're adapted to them, no. But can you basically make them less dangerous, less problematic, getting rid of a lot of the, things like a lot of these anti-nutrients? But when we're talking about things like oxalates, for instance, that's a different ball game altogether. You consume too much of this sort of stuff and build up too much oxalate, and you don't get enough dairy, because in the past people used to eat these grains, but they combine it with dairy. Throughout Europe, it was bread, dairy, bread, dairy, bread, dairy. What? Basically, a lot of that stuff, and you're not having overloading of oxalates. So the small amount of oxalate that you're getting from the grains, you bind with the dairy, with the calcium, and get rid of it. It doesn't get absorbed. And that was the difference. Nowadays, we're less dairy, more grains. We're absorbing more oxalate. We're absorbing more anti-nutrients. We're not preparing them and all that. And so we're really bad. So do we have the capacity? Yes. Is it species appropriate or healthy? Probably not, to a large extent. It depends how you prepare it and all that, how much you break down some of these anti-nutrients, how much you're physically active to convert a lot of it to glycogen, so you're not basically engaging the Randall cycle. There's a lot of ifs along that whole thing. If we go back, people were very physically active from the moment they got up in the morning to the moment, in agricultural, most people, there was only a small amount of rulers, and they were as fat as King Henry, if you remember. He was he had gout and everything because he was engaging the Randall cycle, eating shitloads and sitting around all day because other people were working their asses off. So if you're working your ass off and you're getting small amounts of nutrients and you're you're getting not enough calories in many cases, enough energy, it's impossible to engage the Randall cycle, and most of that is not even going to be resident in your system. The glucose is going to be utilized so fast, it's not going to be a big problem. We don't live like that anymore. We live a more sedentary lifestyle nowadays. So, and what was the consequences of using a lot of these grains? A lot of deficiencies actually happened. We saw iron deficiencies. We look at archaeological skeletal, a reduction in height, a reduction in, generally in the size of humans, brains, shrinkage of 10%. All these sort of things happen because we had less species appropriate foods. So, yeah, it is definitely problematic. Just because you can actually make something to utilize it doesn't mean that it's species appropriate or going to be in any way beneficial. It's going to cause problems. Not a good idea. Let's put it that way. So it's the perfect excuse to further limit access to animal foods. Yes, exactly. Speed up the new green economy, vegan order, laugh out loud. Yes, exactly. Yes. Definitely stick a solar panel on your head. That's the new approach. It's the new image. So, scampers in the start of the video from the beginning, but 2.5 speed. So you're not missing anything. Okay. You're speeding me up, are you? Aren't I fast enough for you, kitty? God, I'm losing my touch. I must be. Bloody hell. Saw recently SBS Cooking Adam Louie, how he how to identify grass-fed, grain-fed grass, yellow fat. Yep, exactly. Yep. The more yellow it is, because it usually has things like DHA more, and it sort of also has some. You get some of the carotenoids as well from the grass itself, so there's a bit of that as well. Yes, there's a number of things that change, and it tastes better. Actually, if anybody's ever raw fat, I can eat raw fat that's yellow because it's like buttery, But white fat, ugh, God Almighty, can't eat that stuff. You got to cook it. So yeah, there is a difference. But when it comes to a lot of the other nutrients, there's not much of a difference. It's usually in some of the fatty acid compositions and stuff like that primarily. Anyway, watching Harry's video in association with genital growth. Oh, the Ruteri and the rhamnosus. Yes. They do help. They were in rats, remember, Phoenix compilation. But, we can't do these studies in humans for ethical reasons. But it seems to work in other mammals. They've actually tried some of these things even in like chimps. And yes, they did get bigger balls as well. So yeah, possibly, yeah, I've done it myself for a number of months. And things did improve in that department. I'll leave it at that. And basically, probably haven't done as long as some other people. But yes, you can get a bit. I think it's also probably going to be different genetics. They're going to affect some people differently. So it's not going to be, because they never looked at I haven't seen one single study that's actually looked at the genetic pathways. So, and we know that both Ruteri and rhamnosus do influence some of the genes epigenetically. So there may be some factor there as well with some people. So yeah, be interesting. One day they'll probably do some studies in that area, and it will make it much easier. Discord found a study about lactoferrin helping the immune system. Yes, exactly, against bacteria and viruses. Yes, lactoferrin is really, really important. Remember, interferon is really important in your body. Interferon is produced by your body, and lactoferrin actually upregulates the production of interferon. That's why it works. Yes, it has a lot of different usages, not just the binding of lectins, including the corona types. Exactly, as I said. Yes, good to have raw milk. Very good for you. Does Harry make you hard? I'm going to move on. That's a loaded question. Oh, God, loaded cum question. Oh, God, I couldn't help myself there. Likes his yoga to be Greek. God, now that's a back ender, isn't it? You know what I mean about a back ender. Yes, I expected that. Exactly. You got your laughs. That's good. A good study might get me excited. Don't include me. G'day, Gary. Good to see you, mate. Nerd. Oh, God. Yes. Oh, the mouse nerd. Kind of leaking out of every orifice. Harry, do you have any tips for fat adaptation when starting a carnivore diet? Electrolytes help sleeping, fighting cravings, etc. Well, let's put it this way. Taurine is really important. I usually find that people that usually have a lot of issues with their gut, usually have a lot of issues with their gallbladder, not functioning well, a lot of these sort of things. Well, you need taurine, and sometimes, and also taurine. If you go and check my video on stomach acidity and all that, helps there as well. This is another reason why a lot of people do like the sort of the raw meat, because you can actually, even with the slightly higher pH rather than the lower pH, you can actually still work with raw meat, and they find it less problematic, easier to digest, because it's still got some enzymes there. It's helping with all the digestion process, where you really need low pH to deal with digestion of cooked meat, because of the lack of enzymes and stuff like that, because you pretty much lose them in the cooking. So that's part of the reason. It's part of the reason why humans had fermented raw meat dishes of different sorts, to be able to get these sort of cured meats and all sorts of things with salt, to get some of these factors that you don't get in cooked meat. So I'm a bit of a aficionado, both fermented and raw type of meats and stuff like that. So it's not my major food, but I do consume them. I know Bart dislikes them, but that's a personal preference that he has. But, you know, I mean, there are other options always for certain people. I don't like the egg whites, I'll be honest. I just do not if I'm going to have raw eggs, I just consume the actual yolks. I can consume yolks. I can just swallow yolks down, not a problem. I hate the egg whites. It's just, I don't know, just sort of the taste. I don't know what it is. It just doesn't sit well with me. So I usually put the egg whites, and we'll make an omelette out of them, and combine it with some other eggs most of the time. But I would say, with, you know, when it comes to, if you're getting enough protein in the diet, and you're getting enough of the micronutrients and stuff like that in the diet, you're getting enough salt, as I said, sun, salt, and you know, vitamin D, very important to be able to pull in from the meats, your calcium and other electrolytes, very important. So so you need a good vitamin D status. So get out in the sun and enjoy the sun. Have a steak in the sun, even better, salted. And salt, which will, I mean, if you can't get good quality salt, you can always get a mineral supplement as well, a colloidal mineral, especially if you've been deficient for a long time and you have problems eating your organ meats. Some people do. I don't, but some people do. So consider that. I would say that, because the tight junctions are going to be tightened with things like vitamin D. So that's an important thing in, you know, fix the gallbladder, fix the stomach acidity. And that's basically salt will, you know, the chloride from the salt will actually improve, you know, those proton pumps in your stomach. Plus, you know, adding, now, you know, as long as you haven't used proton pump inhibitors, PPIs and stuff like that, that can be a different situation. There you may have to sort of wean off that garbage over some time and make adjustments. Then you'd have to get a consultation with somebody like Bart, or somebody like Mary or whatever, because I don't do those sort of things, and you'd have to be sort of coached. I did do a few in the beginning, but you know, it's just, I just can't. I don't have the time. Work just takes up too much of my time, and family life, so I just do not have the time. Sorry, but it's just a reality. So I would basically try and actually have a very clean carnivore diet, and that would help get enough protein, and you will not run a very low ketosis when you get enough protein, and so you should not have electrolytes issues. It's usually people on low protein, high fat that tend to basically have electrolyte issues. They just can't hold on to sufficient. You want to be not as in such a catabolic state as a therapeutic keto. That is where a lot of these electrolyte issues, you know, most people, when they eat enough protein, they don't have electrolyte issues. When they get most of their hydration from fat, rather than continually drinking water, high deuterium garbage, hydrate with fat. And, you'll notice your antidiuretic hormones will upregulate, and you won't need as much water. And you'll be able to hold on to your electrolytes, and you'll be very stable. You won't have any of these conditions. Basically, I played around with these things, electrolytes and all sorts of things. And I realized very quickly that the thing that stops your cramps very fast is keep eating steaks and salted, because the salt will help far more than all these other things. And if you're eating sufficient animal products, you'll get more than enough. You'll get more magnesium and potassium than you excrete. Go and check the videos that I did on excretion rates of these electrolytes. And if you're getting enough vitamin D, you'll pull in enough calcium. And if you're getting enough minoquinone 4, vitamin K2, you'll be able to put it in the right place. If you're eating a species-appropriate diet, you're not going to have these problems. You're going to be functioning properly. If you've got some underlying conditions, then you need somebody to assist you. I'm willing to basically answer every Wednesday questions that people pose to me and give them a bit of a 1 or 2 paragraphs of what I would do, and they can go with that. But if you want, a proper coach to coach you through, then it's basically you'll have to go and see one of the other guys that does consultancies it's their it's their income. That's what they live off, and they can spend more time with you and help you in that regard. Anyway, yes. Back to that, are we? Yes, I forgot about that. I've moved on. Emu Wars is a dent on Australia's past. Get the Gatling gun out there and sort them out. Kangaroos as well. They're a plague proportion nowadays. None of our native people actually hunt them anymore, unfortunately. So we need to deal with them. They're a menace. They're taking over the country. The kangaroos, that is. South Australia was never a penal colony. You're from South Australia, are you, Helen? God, I'm from South Australia. You convicts, 2-headed convicts down here in Tassie. Yes, I've heard it all. Female suffrage, South Australia. Okay. Before the rest of us. I'm not even going to comment on that. I'll move on before I get into trouble. Don't destroy the fun, Helen. Thanks, Richard. Yeah, caught up. Still stop teasing. I was going to tease, but I didn't want to upset Helen too much. I do that to my feminist friends. Oh, God. Thank you, StreamYard, for jumping again. But then again, there is the YouTubia mafia observing. Backs get in the way. Oh, yes, they do. Very much, Raymond. Yes. Yes, we need a Nuremberg trial 2.0 to reestablish that Nuremberg code. Yes. Is ivermectin still relevant? Haven't been able to find a good quality study on it. And also, why would Merck come out with a new pill if they just jump out money by using ivermectin? Ivermectin is so cheap. It's dirt cheap. And it's off patent, which means you can't monopolize it. So if it became popular, everybody would be able to produce it a dime a dozen. And you'd have all the actual, what do they call the pharmaceutical companies that are generic drug makers. That's it. Trying to bloody remember. So the generic drug market would jump on this like there was no tomorrow. And yeah, but there are studies on ivermectin. And what it does is it actually slows down replication. Like in some pathogens, for instance, it can actually cause, like in their proteins, it can actually cause like a paralysis thing. So it has a lot of utilities in that regard. It's not a cure for COVID. What it does is it slows down replication. So they've used it in the hospitals it was in Mexico. Ivor Cummings did a thing. I'm trying to remember the friggin' city. I can't remember it. Anyway, and Ivor actually showed where they had like 280% of mortality, and it dropped down to 6% when they started using ivermectin. So, do you need a study to prove to yourself, Carl, that ivermectin doesn't work? The problem is we don't have studies because they're not funded by the industry. There are only studies out there that cover basically like pathogens in general in animals. We don't really have a lot of studies in humans, unfortunately. And they've only been used for other pathogens, like you can use them for Lyme disease, for ticks, like in the tick that, people that actually, New South Wales and in the southern parts of the US, and there's another place in the world, and I can't remember it because my memory's, anyway. And there are ticks that actually can cause you like an anaphylaxis to meat. And ivermectin can paralyze those ticks and deal with them. And also the pathogens that those ticks put into your body can be paralyzed and killed off, which is a good thing because you can actually reverse this sensitivity to ticks, Lyme, and stuff like that very fast with ivermectin. Plus, with vitamin D, also plays an important role in regulating your immune system. So if you combine the two together, really good stuff happens. Yes. I miss the sun. Yes. It's out there, Robert. It's out there. Actually, we are moving into the sunny season. It's spring it's the second month. We're in the second month, or nearly in the center of the second month of spring in Australia, in the southern hemisphere. So I am enjoying some warmer days. It is Tasmania after all. Some is the operative word. But it is getting better. And actually yesterday we went for a nice walk again, and as I was coming back, it did rain a bit, and I had my raincoat on, so that was fine. And then after that, I looked out, and then I walked out, and my next door neighbour, Hello Kitty, was out. She's not around. She said, "What's she on the live stream today?" God, I need to go over there and spank her. Not supporting me. Where are you? Maybe she's in the city, but and basically, it sort of changed a bit, and then I went out for another walk up the hill and all that. That was a nice walk. So it's all over the place at the moment. Hobart, sort of sunny. It's like four seasons, it's just weird and wacky and wild, Oh, just notice your lamps. Get out of here, mate. Anyway, see ya. Thanks for dropping in. Now, what was this? It's dark outside now. Northern hemisphere, on the other side of the planet. Yes, I can understand that. Any danger in getting nearly 1,000% of retinol almost every day? I wouldn't recommend it because it is a cofactor with vitamin D, and you could induce a vitamin D deficiency because you'd actually utilization. That's the theory. We've never really done the experiments. So can I say definitively? No, nobody can, because we've never done the experiments. Now, your liver, if it's healthy, this is the operative word. If it's not healthy, definitely no. You won't be able to store it very effectively. It'll remain in large amounts in your bloodstream. Not a good idea. Things need to be stored or used, and they shouldn't be floating around in the bloodstream for too long, is the operative word from what we've seen. They can degrade and become pro-oxidants. That's why everything can, basically. So I would say, if you're getting enough retinol from cream, from eggs, bit of liver and stuff like that, not really going to be a problem. Look, your liver can store a lot. If it's healthy, it can store shitloads of retinol. I mean, compared to the other things like B12 and a whole lot of folate and all this, let's say folate and all that amount, when it comes to retinol, it's just massive. So the body has got massive ability to store. But as I've said, I usually say to people, do not supplement, just get it from the food. And most of our tribal people never consume massive amounts of liver every day. They consume small amounts as a multivitamin, and that's fine, which probably will give you about 200% or something like that at most. That's fine, but just I wouldn't go overboard. I'm not saying it's dangerous, but I'm saying that we don't have really good research, and most tribal populations have never done it that way. So, stick within. That's why I usually say to people, because I tend to go outdoors and come indoors and stuff like that. So I do in winter about 5,000 IUs of vitamin D. And, and if I've got a bit of a respiratory thing, I push it up to 20 for a couple of days and then bring it down. Now, I know Lamps and some of his relatives, they do about 10,000 continuously. But the reason for that is because I'm always going outdoors for quite a lot of hours, and I really don't know where my levels are always at. So it's sort of playing it safe. But through the COVID period, I've been doing 10,000 IUs every day. And even when I've been going out, and I can tell you, I'd have to agree with Lamps that basically, yes, probably it's not an issue at all in that regard. Probably if you're far away, like we are in Tasmania, which is far away from the equator, probably it's a better thing in that regard. But I do get enough retinol as well. So, and because both are cofactors, both retinol and it's probably a good idea to combine the two, and also MK4, because remember they activate things, and that's why I say brie, some liver that's got MK4, eggs have got MK4. So those sort of foods, the animal foods, have got MK4, and they can then all the actual like GLA protein that's involved in osteocalcin and stuff like that, with putting calcium in the actual bones, into the bone matrix, which is the protein bone matrix. You need MK4, you need vitamin K2 basically. And so, if you're eating a good species of protein, you'll get all these nutrients. You don't need to supplement them and all that. I've only supplemented like high dose MK4 because I wanted to remove a lot of the high calcification that I had in my tissue and use a lot of taurine in order to break down the fibrotic tissue in my heart, which is what I did, and it worked. It took a number of years. Nothing happens quick, but it did happen. So, yeah, I would say definitely there's no science to show an issue, and you'd have to do these sort of levels like for months upon months upon months upon months with very low vitamin D status before you really saw any problems. So, but do you really need to consume that amount? Probably not. None of our ancestors, they had times when they consumed quite a bit, they stored it, and other times when they consumed less. A healthy liver is the most important thing here. So as long as your liver is healthy, not an issue. If you've got liver issues, or you've come from a kibble diet with a lot of health issues and stuff like that, I usually say to people, hold off, fix all these things, and then start consuming more of these other things. So, yeah, that's why I usually don't recommend organ meats initially, unless somebody's got major deficiency in that. I don't worry, because I know they've got major deficiencies, and I'm trying to get as much in as possible. But usually if they've just come off and they've got I'm going, they may have some underlying things that are not perfect. Let's fix those and then introduce more of these other things. So it depends on a lot of things, so it's you got to nuance these, and you got to know where people are at any time. Ideal Saturday night, light rain, solid neighborhood, and calmly watching Harry stream. Enjoy. And the other thing, who asked me before something about the calming stuff and all that, something about calming and sleeping. Remember, for GABA, taurine increases GABA, the calming. So to calm the nervous system, actually taurine calms the nervous system. I usually recommend it for a lot of people that have got like very stressful lives in the evening to actually consume more of their taurine in the evening, not in the daytime. Because I want to, I usually say when you, in the morning before you go to work, have some then, so it can calm you down a bit. And then when you basically in the evening, when you want to go to sleep, have some then a couple of hours before to calm you for the sleep, to increase your GABA levels. So it has a calming effect as well. So it can be used for that purpose as well. See how meat can calm you. Well, if you have enough. A lady told me that she managed to become sarcopenic when she lost weight as a carnivore. I wonder how she managed to do that. No idea. I would suspect low leucine. So it depends on what. I've heard of people doing like very low protein carnivore diet with very high fat. And if you're not getting enough leucine, yeah, you can become sarcopenic. So it's again these sort of therapeutic high for ages, for a very long period of time. Yes, it can be done. Very rare, but it can be done. Usually, if you've got a lot of tissue, you're losing a lot of tissue, you should be able to recycle that. But again, can you, if you don't have enough leucine, obviously you're not going to drive the muscle protein synthesis. So it's the thing. Remember, if you remember that study that I did on the leucine, it actually showed when somebody was fasted, which would be the equivalent of somebody being on a low protein, high fat type carnivore diet, they wouldn't be getting enough leucine in the diet to basically to maintain the tissue. To maintain the tissue, you need leucine. I can't, do I have to whack people over the head about it? Leucine, 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 leucine. You need to get, that is what drives muscle protein synthesis. It's not carbs. If it was carbs, all these people that are eating shitloads of carbs should not be basically sarcopenic and all that. It's when we started reducing protein and increasing carbs is why everybody became sarcopenic. It's not insulin, guys. Never has been. That study showed it. In a fasted state, you can infuse insulin into somebody in a fasted state. They will not increase their muscle protein synthesis. You put leucine in a fasted state, they will increase their muscle protein synthesis. In a fasted state, you'll probably just basically, potentially, if they had not fat adapted, you'll probably actually put them into a coma if you infuse insulin. Never do that. But if you basically, and Cahill actually put them in ketosis before he infused it to prove that you don't need, you can drive glucose very low and still live off ketones and long chain fats. But getting back to what I was saying, you basically, it's a lack of protein, There's still this madness. Yeah, you've got a population like the sand people, our most ancient humans on the planet, consuming on average 3.92 grams of protein. You've got a whole lot of these other tribal populations consuming around 3-ish on average, which is what I do most of the time. Try to, not always. I have to be honest. Sometimes I drop down to about 2.5 or 2. I try to get up to 3 now and then, but not very successfully. But if you want to build bone, you want to build muscle, you need that. You need to get that. If you want to maintain just in maintenance, probably 1.5 is okay, because you'll have the time restricted feeding, you'll have some autophagy, some recycling, and then you'll get a bit of a boost when you have that meal, that anabolic boost with the leucine, especially if you're just eating steaks and stuff like that, will get good levels of leucine. So, yeah, and then you'll get a couple of hours of muscle protein synthesis, which is going to be fine. So you'll be able to have good maintenance sort of levels. But if you want to build tissue and you're in a sarcopenic state, you better fucking get the leucine up. There's no other way. You better get the leucine up if you're going to build tissue back. and the proteins. It doesn't happen any other way. Please go and check that video of mine. It's called, just Google Harry Serpanos leucine and you'll find the video where I show all the information on that point. Maybe another underlying physiological problem. No, I suspect it's probably she's doing one of those crazy low protein carnivore diets. Anyway, high fat. Do get the ketones up. No, you want to be using energy. You're not chasing ketosis. You're chasing fat adaptation and reductions and producing in your mitochondria good metabolic water, low in deuterium. That's what you're chasing to basically allow your mitochondria to work better and produce more energy. You're definitely not chasing ketones. If you're doing that, you're a fool. Anyway, too catabolic for too long. Harry, when you say our ancestors would get a bit more glucose from the cortisol spike to go hunt, isn't that? Nope, absolutely not. Cortisol, look, chronic cortisol, which is continuous throughout the day, is a problem. So if you've got cortisol at night, you're suppressing melatonin. Melatonin is a reparative. It also repairs the mitochondria. Yes, the electron chain. Who would have known? But it does. So if you're not producing enough melatonin because you're suppressing it with cortisol, chronic cortisol, yes, that can be a problem. You know what suppresses cortisol very fast, reduces it? Salt. Sodium can suppress cortisol. So what do you think a lot of these people, when they actually have a bit of salt, it actually is a calming effect. Who would have known? So it's the old thing. Sun, which reduces vitamin D, is also an important for, and taurine, for electrolyte balance, taurine, for, also for the minerals and a lot of the enzymes that are involved in all that, homeostasis. Vitamin D also plays a role. So sun, salt, basically your bloodstream is like ocean water nearly, We came out of the oceans, all life. So this is the reason why, when you don't do things appropriately, you can tax those adrenals. Yes, you can. So you need to basically get the sodium in. Do not fear sodium. You sometimes can reduce the requirement because of upregulating your antidiuretic hormones like I've done. But that takes a long time of adaptation and all that sort of stuff, and deuterium depletion, because when you still got a lot of deuterium, you're still dumping a lot and you'll still urinate a lot. So people in the early stages of any of these diets are still dumping a lot. Insulin's coming down. There's all sorts of things. So you've got to manage that at the time, and then eventually, because we don't live ancestrally from birth to death. It's just the reality. But cortisol, no, it's not an issue. Cortisol is just it's a hormone, has its roles, has also beneficial roles as well in the body. I'll probably do something on cortisol, but chronic cortisol can be damaging, can be too damaging to tissue. But that's, again, because of derangements. It's not normal. Cortisol has its role. All hormones have their role, but if they're in a deranged state because people are not getting enough sun, enough, the micronutrients that the body needs and the right macronutrients that the body needs, then things start going haywire. Yep. So, yes. Cortisol would not be constantly high, I suspect. Exactly. Usually comes up and drops down, so it'll actually spike and then it will come down and it will be quite low at about 11 o'clock. Now you know why I have my first meal then. I don't want to be spiking even small amounts of insulin at the same time that I'm basically high in cortisol. Humans, and why would you put any fuel in at the time when your body's actually providing you fuel? I suspect it's a genetic adaptation to spike cortisol in the morning, give us some energy, get us out to do a bit of hunting, to replete our glycogen for our muscles. because when you're actually not physically, when you're just walking around and all that, you're primarily oxidizing fatty acid. But you still need to replete glycogen. Why? Because you may have to run after something when you're hunting. That's why. So that cortisol spike was an adaptation, give us a bit of extra glucose production, bit of glycogen, fill those muscles up. We're ready to go. Grab the spear. Let's go, boys. Let's get that animal. Beautiful system, the way it actually was designed in nature. Beautiful. Unfortunately, we've just absolutely deranged it with the inappropriate foods. What's Lukey got for me? Oops. Oh, you got to like Lukey. Let me just share this. Share screen too. It's the Sesame Street thing. Bingo! MK4, leucine, deuterium, kibble diet in that regard. Oh, yeah, I do say that often. Oh, well, fuck it. Oops. Oh, God. Leave it. Sorry. I tried. I couldn't help myself. Greek history, dairy, protein rats. Yes, the big ones with the big... yes, exactly. We won't go into the details. Glucagon, genetic SNPs. Yes, SNPs. Mary. Yes, a good lady. Very nice lady. Free space. I'll have to think of something. Basically, yes, I do say that as well. Yeah. Being late. That's a Greek thing. Just learn to live with it, guys. Pork. Yes, one of my favorite meats. Golden era bodybuilding. Yes, good blokes that knew how to get the right foods in. Trolling blinkers. Absolutely. Where is the little troll? My personalized little troll. Carnitine, definitely. Novavax, yes, out of necessity. Choline, kombucha, yeah, those drinks. Yeah, I do like those drinks. Taurine, yes, and Mr. Randall himself, yes. My salute to Mr. Randall. And I would have to also salute, I'd have to put in that free space, Mr. Bart K, professor himself. It was a struggle between Ted and Mr. Bart K. I was going for a moment, I better not upset him. Who cares about upsetting Ted? So Mr. Bart K goes into the free space. He was the person who really explained to me the Randall cycle. So I have to really thank him because he basically talked about it. And then I went away and did my own research on it. And I realized, it makes sense. It really bloody makes sense. And then I started thinking about all these other populations. And then I started looking at the ruling classes that physicians in the past used to talk about diabetes and all that in the ruling class that were sedentary and they were eating mixed macros. But the population was eating under their caloric energy was much lower than, they were always, because of a lot of physical work, so they were never engaging the Randall cycle. So why you didn't see the manifestations of any of these problems, but now you do, because people are basically 21st century lifestyle, cars, everything else. I call them basically driving coffins around. And basically, so once I understood the Randall cycle, then I also have to thank Laszlo as well, because Laszlo gave me an understanding of the deuterium side and also understanding how deuterium affects the actual energy production and how that can also have an effect on the Randall cycle, because it can lower the threshold, the energy threshold of each cell. So that can actually mean that your Randall cycle activation can happen at a much lower threshold than what happened in the past because of a lot of damaging. As you grow older, you've got more organelles, mitochondrial damage, less capacity for energy utilization. So the Randall cycle can be activated even at a lower threshold. So that gave me another insight into this whole system. So yes, I would have to say thank you to all of those people. And yes, anyway, we will move on. Yes, and thanks, Lukey, for that. Possibly right. Yeah, but you're on a kibble diet as well. And once you moved away and started getting sun, salt, and meat, things got better. So look, sometimes thyroid issues can be other things as well. They can be basically either you're not getting enough of the nutrients because, some of the key nutrients in there we're talking about. I mean, there are other cofactors, but some of the key ones are iodine, selenium, zinc, which are in there as important cofactors to a whole lot of enzymes in the thyroid. And they can be also displaced and affected by things like, fluoride, a number of other sort of, what's the other one called? The one that they put in carpets and, God almighty, brain fog. Yeah, it's something that they put in carpet systems and stuff like that. Yes, Phoenix compilation. Do you remember? Shell, you're here. Do you remember? It's what they put in things like bromide and things like that as well. And some of those can actually have an effect on the thyroid. There is another one, I can't remember it, they put in the carpets. But anyway, a lot of these things are gassing when you're indoors, so you can actually get a lot of those things. And if you're not getting enough of the good nutrients, like enough iodine, enough selenium, because selenium as selenide, which I've talked about in that thing that I did on the fish, is a chelator of these things. Sodium as well plays a big role in clearing some of that stuff. So if you're not getting enough sodium, you can also have difficulty clearing out some of this crap. The same thing happens with iodine. So it really depends. And a lot of people nowadays, their sort of kibble diet and all that are very, very have poor micronutrient nutrition. Yeah, the flame retardants. It's the brominate. Yeah. Thanks, Lukey. Yeah. God, see what happens when you watch Mick the Vegan. You end up with brain fog with that guy. And formaldehyde. Yes, exactly. Dina, very well put. Yes, all that sort of crap. So a lot of things that are in our environment nowadays that we're just basically ingesting. I'm going to slide to bed. Not all, Harry. I'll watch your replay. Thanks, Shell. Take care. Thanks for being here anyway, for popping in. I will see you next week. Lovely lady. And issue that she is claiming that people need coaching exercise so they don't become sarcopenic when losing weight. I suspect she wants to sell consultations. I suspect so. Yeah. You need exercise. Bullshit. You can be the biggest couch potato. If I give you more like leucine, how many people basically have put on muscle just sitting around, just eating more steaks because of the muscle protein synthesis of leucine? Obviously, if you actually do weight-bearing exercises, you'll actually even get better results. But to say that you're going to be sarcopenic on a carnivore diet, yeah, maybe she's selling something. Yes, very true. Maybe it's not the amount, it's just make-believe. So she can sell a consultancy. Let me train you. Yes, please hit that like button. God, am I that behind? Fuck me. Oops. I used the F word again. Oh, God. Oh, well. more demonetization from YouTube. Can't help myself. Just cause Luke falling down on the job. Oh, Richard, be nice. Could fasting autophagy help with COVID recovery, Harry? Or is fasting with a virus a bad idea? Fasting with a virus is a bad idea. When you've got things like candida, things like actually by not eating, well, candida is a funny thing, can be made worse with an oxalate dump. So it can be made worse. So I usually say to people, if you've had so fasting can be very good with viruses, with bacteria and stuff like that, and with fungi and stuff like that. And unless you've got a lot of dumping of oxalate, because dumping oxalate can be a problem. It can actually aggravate the candida and turn it from a yeast into a pathogenic thing. So you may need, when you're doing fasting, if you've actually had a lot of plants that were heavy in, like a lot of people did spinach and things like that, like I did, had a lot of that, in order to avoid the dumping effect, negative effects on candida, I would basically consider like drinking like lemon juice, warm lemon juice in the morning on a fast. It's not going to affect your autophagy or anything like that, but it will prevent your yeast, any of that going from benign to pathogenic. So yeah, that can be a problem with fast, especially if you've got pre-existing some level, low level or high level dumping of oxalate. That's another thing that we don't talk about in fasting, that you can actually have an outbreak of candida because of oxalate. So it's it's a thing. I was talking with Hello Kitty yesterday about a number of these things, and I thought about it. Oh, there she is. Oh, good to see. And I thought about the sort of oxalate issue, because she had a lot of plants in the past in her diet, like I did. So, and I had a lot of oxalate dumping, and that can be a damn issue as well. So, but with viruses, food, you need to. Protein is the best. Protein is really good because it's actually giving you more nutrients to basically, because you're building up your immune system. And what's your immune system build up? Proteins. You do need the vitamin D cofactors, obviously, some of the cofactors. So that's why you need to basically do a successful job in that regard. So yes, it's usually bacterial infections and other things like that where fasting works much better. But there is the dumping issue. Is just, so I thought to bring it up because I always forget about it. But it can be an issue, especially when you're not eating. The bacterial load will drop. But if you're aggravating through dumping at the same time, that yeast can explode, yeast infections like candida. So that's, sometimes we forget about that thing. And especially in particular, it seems amongst women. And I think because women traditionally have consumed, due to healthy user bias attitudes, have consumed more plants than men in the past. So that's the more susceptible to things like oxalate toxicity and oxalate pain in that regard. Yes. Anyway, let's move off. Oh, yes, definitely. Please hit that. Blast the button. Blast it. Give it hell. So, Hello Kitty got Uncle Harry. I call her Auntie Ling anyway. But I got enough sun today and got myself steaks. Sounds good. So you went up to our regular place. Sounds bloody good. What should we say? Can those don't want to thumb up, at least thumb down or something? That's true. That would be useful for the algorithm. Yes, all the goons that are here, just thumb down. I'll take that as well. I'm tempted to unlike you. See what Luke does. Probably ban you. At least for the day, and then release, Don't tell them that. Everybody will thumb me down. Biblical angels. Ah, yes. Any other supplements you suggest for muscle gains other than leucine? Not really. There's nothing else that really actually works. Taurine is probably the only other thing. And the reason, because it's an amino transporter. So it will actually make sure that you get more aminos come across. So it actually improves the absorption. It will slow down peristalsis, which means that rather than actually absorbing the same amount of food in, let's say, a certain amount of time, it'll probably slow things down by a certain percentage. We don't know exactly how much, because it's been calculated in rats, but not in humans. So we don't know how much it slows it down in humans. But what it does allow you to absorb over a longer period of time more of those proteins and get them in, rather than, because you do lose some into the feces. That's how some of those. Remember the study that Paul Mason showed? What was it called again? And it was basically showing, when you take out fiber completely and you get isobutyrate and all these other short chain fatty acids that go very high up, that's from the extra protein, because usually people, when they take fiber, they're going to consume more protein. So that's where, to reduce the amount you give to the actual, it's not going to be much, Let's put it this way. You're not going to get a massive amount, but you will get a slight take of that extra rather than losing it. So, but yeah, probably the only thing I can think of is taurine, not anything else. L-citrulline seems to help with vasodilation and sort of nitric oxide, which sort of helps with sort of the general functioning of muscles. So that can help as well. But that's probably about it. And just get good nutrition. And good nutrition will come from things like steak and eggs, so. Yeah, that as well. Yeah, forgot about creatine. Yeah, creatine loading, it's called. I take about a gram of creatine every day, nearly. Yeah. So that's just creatine loading, because remember it's basically, creatine phosphate, so basically that's what's giving you energy in your muscles, those filaments that are going back and forward. So yeah, creatine. I forgot about creatine. Yes, well said. Yep, exactly. That is, well, you guys are picking up on all this. Good to see. How can a virus mutate, as it's just a non-living piece of protein? It doesn't. It's. I don't know. I haven't done that thing yet. It uses the body to replicate, and non-living doesn't mean that it's not organic. It's organic. It's probably not the best word that science has come up with to call it non-living. See, what organic matter? Organic matter is carbon-based. So the differences between organic and inorganic matter, which is what I was going to do that video on, which I did promise you, but I've forgot it. But inorganic matter basically is not carbon-based, but organic matter is carbon-based. And because it's carbon-based, it's got the ability to interact with other carbon molecules and in the protein structure, and protein structures can interact and affect and take from other and alter themselves over time. It depends on the structure, the protein structure. That's why I said some viruses have very difficulty mutating. That's why we've been able to wipe them out with vaccines, where others, like the corona types, tend to mutate and alter It's because their protein structures are such that they can alter, and they can piggy and take some material. The DNA is very similar. Like our DNA, our junk DNA, it can actually take proteins from viruses. We know because we've looked at our DNA and we've found all this junk DNA, which we call it junk. I think it's got some value. It had some interactions with the epigenetics, but we don't understand it very well. But basically those molecules. Now, DNA is like a virus, you could say, but it's not alive. It's the cell that can replicate and all that. That's the live part. And so things that can replicate and eat we call living organic matter. Non-living organic matter is everything else that doesn't basically have the ability to replicate on its own or eat on its own. So it relies on other to replicate and to get nutrients. So that's how it works. Well, it doesn't actually require, basically. This is why we call viruses immortal, because something that is not living, organic, never dies. It just basically can replicate continuously. Well, it can die if the immune system takes it out with macrophage by enveloping it in and tearing it apart into its basic constituents of amino acids. So it can break it up in that regard, but it can be destroyed, so to speak, but it can't be it can't die because it never lived. A living organism is something that basically can replicate and eat. So there's a definition for it. Now, is it the perfect definition? No, because at the end of the day, it's we have the tendency of using the word it's all carbon life, and then using the word life, and it's confusing for people. I understand, but it's used in a different context. It's not used in the same context, and this is the problem. Viruses can still replicate. Can still mutate, can still alter, can still take up other proteins in their environment, which they can stick on them because they've got like these glycocalyc type things. They've got, molecules that can actually bind things, connect with things and stuff like that. So in a sense, they're not living like other biological tissue is. And that's why they don't actually exhibit the things, because the other ones are dependent on energy. They depend on energy, and they're dependent on basically the ability to replicate. And if they can't do that, they degrade. You don't see a virus degrading. That means it doesn't, unless it's destroyed by something like a macrophage. Otherwise, it doesn't. So it has this ability to be more or less like the early cells in the oceans that were immortal and just kept on replicating. It's the way so that sort of life, like a cancer cell, is probably the difference between the two is that one can replicate and is considered eternal, immortal life, and the other one is considered immortal non-life, non-living. But they're all organic. And the differences between organic and inorganic, as I said, is carbon. It's the carbon component, the carbon backbone of all these protein structures. And that's the differentiation between the two. And the differentiation between a living and non-living is, I don't like the word, honestly, myself, because I think it's very confusing in some regards. We should have come up with something better, but we haven't. But it's talking about that one has the ability to replicate on its own and the ability to feed itself and stuff like that, and the other one doesn't. It has to literally use some other organism, like a parasite in a sense, getting in and using its replication methods, its feeding methods, and that's how viruses work. Why they work like that, Nobody knows. We know they work like that because we've used electron microscopes to see them, in their minuscule size, interacting with other material in their environment and doing these interactions. But why it works like that? Why do some organic building blocks that are combined in a certain way work in a certain way? We just don't understand. It's just it's beyond our understanding. But that doesn't mean we haven't observed it. We have. We observed it and we see this happening. We see these viruses mutating. We see these viruses, taking up material, giving away material. And we see them having to go into other organisms to basically replicate. But we just don't understand, you could say, the deep and meaningful stuff of, why all this happens in the way and why the universe is the way it is. I mean, we know that the strong nuclear forces or the weak nuclear force and gravity and all these things have certain values to them. Why they have, we don't know. My sort of personal belief is that God set it up this way to evolve and unfold in these laws because they would give this sort of integrity, their way that the universe would have these energy relationships and all that to be able to unfold in the way it did. Otherwise it wouldn't exist. We wouldn't be here, So in a sense, that's why it is. But just because it doesn't use and as I said, this is the nomenclature of science. It's the best we've got. It's the way we word these things. Now, if you can come up with a better word or a better way to describe these states of organic matter, go right ahead and send it into one of the periodicals and see if they adopt it. But, this is the best we can come up with in the way interpreting that. Errors in replication, exactly. But that's because also there are other materials that it's interacting with, So, but why these replication errors are happening, we don't know. We think that it's other material that it's interacting with, organic molecules, and it's picking up the stickiness. It's picking up some of these molecules and causing some replication, and others, because of their structures, they seem to not have this affinity to certain molecules, and so they don't replicate as easy, and that's why some viruses just remain static. You can have a vaccine and you're done for life. Really hard. It's complicated stuff. We can see, we've observed, but we just don't understand the deep processes that are involved in why this sort of happens in the way it happens and the differences. So that's why it's a very difficult thing to explain sometimes. Yes, there are evolutionary pressures, as I said, to mutate, but not all organisms will mutate. They will adapt other ways. Some other viruses don't have the ability to mutate as well. So you know what they do? They hide. They will go into soft tissue and hide, or find places in the body to hide, And we know that because sometimes people, get, little warts and stuff like that on you. We know that that virus, what is it called again? The one I'm talking about. Somebody remind me, please. That comes back out of remission, that hides away. Yeah, so things use different strategies in the body to get away, to elude, so it's complicated. Yep. And the material can be from other sources, not from itself only. Frankie continues to get gains, carbs and drinks water, kefir. I asked him about deuterium concerns. He said deuterium is a false topic made up by the elites causing fear-mongering and saying, he's an idiot. Absolute idiot. This is well-established science, deuterium. the hydrogen isotopes. He's just basically trying to justify his addiction. He's young. He's got a lot of mitochondrial density when you're young. You usually have from the moment you're born. Our brown adipose tissue has shitloads of mitochondria. Some of these mitochondria, as we use up our brain adipose tissue, which keeps us warm. That's why children don't feel cold. You can put them in water, they don't feel cold. They're protected by that brain adipose tissue that's got uncoupled mitochondria. And they're just burning away, literally oxidizing away that energy, not creating any ATP and keeping the child warm. That density goes down with time. And when he becomes my age, he's a youngster now in his 20s, but when he, in 30 years' time, becomes my age, it'll be a different story. And, maybe when he gets to, 60 or 70, he'll have a stroller to go around because he won't have enough energy. So, but then it's going to be too late. And he's going to be looking back and saying what a fool I was. If he wakes up to that fact. This is well-established science. I mean, they've actually got DDW25, which is an anti-cancer treatment for dogs. You give them, you reduce the deuterium level in their cells. The cells start normalizing again. They downregulate the oncogenes, and the cancer reverses. They've done it. It's actually a recognized anti-cancer treatment for dogs in the European Union. There's studies. They just won't allow the human studies. I wonder why, because there's so much financial interest by Big Pharma with chemotherapy and everything else. That's why. But he's off the rails generally. Old Frankie, he's lost the plot in many ways. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, typical Tufanoism. Yeah, basically. Everybody's against him and the whole world and everything. Yeah, I thought as well until somebody told me he'd come back. So yeah, hasn't changed him. He's still got these really weird ideas. Thoughts, McCullough. What was leaning all his contents also? Oh, was he? Okay. Yeah, look, big channels are the sort of the obvious. They're gonna look at all these big channels. Small channels like mine were flying under the radar, but I may get a warning at some stage. And what I'll do at that stage is I'll take the whole stuff and I'll move it across to some other platform and library. I'll move the remainder. I still have stuff that I haven't pushed there, and I'll probably some other place as well. So I'm not happy with the situation, and it may have to be that I have to change the format where I do like announcements on this channel and provide links to some other channel somewhere else so people can go and see that content, which is more controversial. It's annoying, to say the least, because it smacks of authoritarianism against free speech and stuff like that, and it also is an invasion of my business interests, because basically this is like these platforms do not produce content. They are like, let's say, a mall, a shopping mall. So you've got a shopping mall which is owned by some company or some individual. That shopping mall rents out space to a whole lot of other businesses, and they can actually sell their wares or provide services. They don't necessarily have to sell products and sell their wares out of those shops. Well, a channel is no different. A channel on YouTube is a store, is an online store, is an online store providing a service, information. It could be also providing products. But at the end of the day, it's a store. Where do they get off to having the right to basically come into my store and tell me how to run my business? Because that's what they're doing. And it would be the same thing if the person owning the building came in and told some, let's say you had a store, a Carnivore store, that basically sold meat products, or a butcher. And basically the owner came in and basically said, I don't want you to sell meat anymore. You'd tell him to take a bloody hike. See, I've got a lease, and I can basically, and I'm protected. If you've got a 10-year lease to have basically a store there, you're protected. You can sell whatever you like. He can't tell you what to sell. It's your business. They can't interfere with your business. And if they basically would break the contract, you could sue them, because basically they've deliberately tried to undermine your business, tried to basically damage you, or let's say outside your business put up signs and said, this guy's really bad. Well, that's defamation. Well, that's what these people are doing. They are defaming us by saying that we are this or that or whatever. So they're defaming us at one level, and two, they're interfering in our business. So as far as I'm concerned, it's YouTube that is in the wrong, not me. And I think at some point there's going to be a lot of people are going to rush in and say, look, we need to do a class action at some point. It hasn't happened yet. We'll see how it all goes. It's becoming quite annoying, to say the least. You were never carnivore. Oh, yes, exactly. Was it the lentil thing that I said? Yes, must have been. Exactly. I need to be spanked. Even completely dead structures are subject to selection. Yes. Well, it's not dead. Dead is something that actually, it's non-living. We call them non-living because something has to be alive to be dead. So something has to live in order to die. Viruses never lived. They just basically organic molecules that are combined in a certain way in their protein structures that allows them to basically mutate to a certain degree depending on a whole lot of factors, plus to replicate using other organisms. So, yes, so basically it's just, it's nonsense. It's just one study publication tried to contaminate soldiers, oh, well, are you listening to Lamps? Are you listening to a whole lot of nonsensical stuff again? It's not dead. It's not living. Something has to live before it can die. It's basically non-living organic molecules that are combined in a certain protein structure. That's all it is. There are molecules, organic molecules that are actually created in space because of the sun's radiation. It can actually bring about organic molecules in space. And if they combine and create certain protein structures, they're still not living. It's only when they can replicate on their own do they become living. And that's when also they're vulnerable, because now they've actually created a more complex organic structure, which means that they rely on external energy. We call that energy glucose and fat, which they oxidize in mitochondria. But viruses do not have mitochondria, do not have the ability to produce energy on their own. So they have to, as protein structures, hijack and utilize a system. It's like enzymes. Enzymes are not alive either. They are transcripted by the body. They are protein nanomachines. They go around and they just don't replicate because they're designed not to replicate. They go around grabbing cofactors and all that and doing a whole lot of things. Viruses do the same thing. And the reason why they're not living is non-living, like enzymes are non-living, is because they can't replicate. They are produced by the replication machinery of the body. So a virus, you could actually say, is very similar to a non-living enzyme, So you've got to get your mind away, because we have this notion that life is basically organic And inorganic, it's, as I said earlier, it's the sort of wrong nomenclature, the wording. The reality is something to be living needs to be able to replicate on its own, period. That's the nomenclature. It's not a perfect nomenclature, but that's the nomenclature or the naming conventions that are used in the science, So sorry, Lamps, but that's the way it actually goes. I mean, you're not a scientist. That's what they use. They've come up with that naming convention to explain these different states of matter, of organic matter. And that's the best language we've got to be able to explain these things. Because if a virus was not, you viewed it in that way, then basically you'd have to explain something that also can't replicate, also can't live on its own, like an enzyme that behaves in the same way, except it can't replicate because it's very tight, the way the structures, the protein structures have been folded in order to not be able to do something like that. But it's a non-living organic entity that basically relies on an organism like us to basically be created or to replicate itself. Anyway, thanks, Lemmy. That's very nice of you. I'll just quickly go down there to the bottom. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Just back from the church. Good for you. I'll watch later. Thank you very much. Love your work, H. Can you start it a little later? No. Sorry about it. It's the time slot. I have to cater for the North American crowd. This is designed for the North American crowd. It's sort of, I know it grabs people in Australasia and grabs people in other areas. That's why I do the evening one, which grabs see, people in Australasia or in East Asia, so Australasia, East Asia, and part of the Pacific, they get to see me both in the morning and in the evening, twice a day. The people that are in the Middle East, Europe, only get to see me in the evening, and the people in North America get to see me in the mornings. Like mornings in Hobart is their evening. And so there is no way I could change these time slots without losing a lot of other people. I mean, you saw even like if it was basically later, Shell, which is in Ohio, it would be too late for her. She'd miss every single one of my live streams. So I already miss some people in North America, which it's just too late for them. So it's a really hard thing to get the right slot. It's just not possible, practical. That's why when I do my specials, I usually do them at about 9 o'clock in the evening in Tasmania. And that seems to basically cover most people around the world. It's a slot that usually covers most people. It's just really difficult to try and actually cater for, because I've got a lot of subscribers in North America, in Europe, and in Australasia. And it's really bloody hard to cater for everyone. Lemmy, it's just the way it is. So yes, you'll catch me when you catch me. It's simple as that. If you basically want me to answer some comment you're really interested, just leave a comment and I'll answer it. If you can't make it to the live stream, I usually get around answering most people's comments. I rarely miss any. I do sometimes, but rarely do. I'm fairly good at that. Oops. Dead matter can't be it's not dead matter, as I said. Can never be done. Bullshit. They don't even isolate viruses matter. Yes, they do. That's nonsense. They use electron microscopes to be able to see it, and they image it, and then they use a number of different organic substances in order to isolate it, and then they put it through a machine which they can actually do a DNA sequence of it, and they know exactly the DNA sequence of it. That's how they know whether there's a mutation or not, or what the mutation is, because they can actually get it and sequence it. In the past, it would take a very long time to sequence DNA. Now it just takes hours in these new sequencing machines. They're great. They can sequence. How do you think 23andMe and all these companies have sequenced human DNA? Human DNA is microscopic as well, but it still can be sequenced. All this can be sequenced. That's nonsense. I mean, I don't know where you get this information, or you've got this sort of strange way of viewing things. We've got technology that can do all this. We can isolate things. We can replicate things. We can basically, DNA sequence them. All this sort of stuff. Work out exactly all the sequences that they've got. These proteins have. So yeah, it's. Lamps has been listening to too much Kaufman content. The grifter who charges $1,400 per hour for consultations. Okay, so some con man, fair enough. So he's been, yes. Look, con men are pretty good. I've had relatives that have been conned by con men, and when I actually came across them, I said to my relatives, "Do you realise you've befriended a con man?" And I asked them to ask that con man a couple of questions. You know what? He took off. The next day, he vanished completely. Why? Because he knew the game was up. I can spot a con artist from miles. They have a specific way of doing things or approaching things, a certain mannerism and body language. So yeah, they're not. But most people, they get charmed. It's all the charm, the befriending. They even befriend the animals. That's how far they go. It's all basically part of to lower your guard. And this is what these people, they play in your neurosis, psychosis, or, if you've got those sort of, where you think everything's a conspiracy, very easily to fall into that trap. I mean, we've got scientific equipment where we've done all this sort of stuff. This is just garbage, Sorry, Lamps, but it is. You need to stop listening to that cockwomble. He's an idiot. He's got no idea. He just comes up with garbage. It's a bit like the guy that actually, said the mRNA vaccines were a problem with autism. He had his own vaccine, which was a competitive vaccine. And the reality is the British authorities did not approve it, because they considered it had problems. And so the MMR vaccine got approved in Britain, and he basically got in bed with a number of the anti-vaxxers in order to basically, for revenge, for whatever. Well, he started representing them. And then he was, for a whole lot of other related issues where he was up for charges for fraud and all sorts of other, inappropriate things for a doctor. He basically then lost his license, and then he jumped in bed with the anti-vaxxers, even though he had his own vaccine that never got approved. And that's why, as I said, when the MMRs, when they withdrew them in Osaka, Japan, that was the only country that ever did it. I'm glad that Osaka, Japan, the Japanese did this experiment where they withdrew from the children completely the MMR vaccine for 2 years. And those children never got it. But the same rate of those children actually showed autism at the same rate, actually even slightly higher the following years, because it's just getting worse because of the kibble diet, of the inappropriate lifestyles and all that. Nothing to do with the vaccines, But then once the Japanese realized that these kids had the same rates that the other kids that got vaccinated, they realized, well, there's no real association. That basically proved the Bradford-Hill criteria that when something is increased, like with tobacco, you get worse effects. When it's decreased, you should get the reversal. It didn't happen. So it did not fulfill the Bradford-Hill criteria for epidemiology, which basically proved that quite clearly, had not even a minuscule of association. It just basically happens that the children, the time they get vaccinated, is about the same time when they start showing these symptoms. And parents, it's very easy, rather than actually pointing their finger towards them and the shit that they eat and the shit that they put in their children's mouth, they basically turn around and have to blame some external factor, because it's much easier than to take responsibility for their own kibble eating and garbage lifestyle that they have, drinking and whatever else these people have been doing, that tend to basically make things worse for them. But anyway, there's my rant. I'll move on before I offend too many people. Probably have already. Not on their own, lamps, not on their own. They're like a parasite. They use a host to replicate. Ah, yes. 3 times. I'm really sped up. 3 times. Very good. I must be going something like that. That must have even been faster for you. Oh, just ate some ruteri. Hope your balls are getting bigger. I'm going to talk about viruses routinely being cultivated in cell media for research purposes. That's exactly right. It's probably going to lead that there are exosome things. Yeah, I know. I urge everyone to dive into the German terrain theories. They're both wrong. Lamps, they are both bloody wrong. I've been telling you this for ages. Why don't you listen? They are both wrong. They're reductionist nonsense, both of them. The reality is humans and all other organisms on this planet basically are interacting with all sorts of organisms. Unless a virus, see if the terrain theory was right, if you maintained a really good healthy body, you should never be affected by anything. The reality is, even the North American Plain Indians, when new viruses came in, which they did not have immunity to, the kibble-eating coastal people, they died in like 90%, were wiped out in some communities. Within the actual tribal people, there were less deaths. So yes, the superior animal died and all that did give them some protection, but still some died. So basically, because the system can exploit, I've always said this: if the terrain was valid, that means you have homeostasis, nothing ever affects you. It's garbage. The reality is, if it can exploit a receptor and your immune system is weak, it's going to fuck you. It's going to, I used the word again. Demonetization. And the germ theory is also wrong, because if a virus doesn't have a receptor to exploit the system, eventually it will basically be cleared out by the immune system. So it will be a non-issue. Or it may be one of those that infects some other bacteria and keeps the bacteria under control, some like pathogenic. So in that regard, yes, you could say there is a little bit of competition between these other organisms that basically provide some benefits and some, balancing and all that. But that doesn't validate the terrain theory, because the terrain theory says it's all like that. And the other theory says everything's going to kill you. They're both wrong. Viruses can move from one organism to another, from another animal or whatever, and sometimes mutate in that animal, come back with more virulence in humans, or they may come back without the capacity to infect humans anymore because they've changed some of their receptor sites, so they can't get into our cells anymore. So they're a non-issue. Like many dog, cat viruses can't get into our system, but some can. So it's quite nonsensical. Anyway, let me just quickly share the stuff that Lukey's created for me. More stuff, which is nice of Lukey. Thank you, Lukey. I appreciate all this sort of stuff. I'll have to first zoom in a bit because they are tiny. They are tiny. Yep, that's more like the size that we want. Yep, sounds bloody good. Repeat realizing his diet kills mitochondria. Oh, yes. Very stressful for him. Very stressful. All that high deuterium sugar that he laters. Yes, yes. And the other one, deuterium, ATP synthase. Oh, yes. That character would definitely take your stuff away from you. Taking his toys. Oh, God. Is he nasty? Yes, he's definitely a deuterium loaded, yes, cockwomble. Yes. Very much a carbon neutral cockwomble. Carbon neutral cockwomble. Deteriorated carbon. Got to come up with some funny things. Let's hope he doesn't become the next king. That would be a worry. Yes, I was referring to antibody-dependent enhancements as making a jabber more vulnerable come winter. But yeah, I'm guessing Novavax will be a booster shot. I'll lie. Definitely not going to be a booster shot for me. I'm going to say, if you want to give me a jab, that's all you're going to give me. I'll go to my doctor actually and get it, so I don't have to go through the bureaucracy of, because he'll just do it. He just say, I don't give a shit. Put your name against it. Sometimes better just to go to GP rather than these sort of clinics out there, because you're going to get these sort of people that, oh, you're supposed to get this, they have that sort of attitude. And you're going to get into basically an argument. So it's just best to go to your GP, because they don't care. They just want you to basically have it. So if you want something else, they'll do it. So do it that way to get away from those idiots. Yes. Waiting Harry advice could give me bigger book. Not you trouble. Now, I don't know whether it has an effect on tit size. That I don't know. Breast size. So yes. Depends how small they are. It's illegal to sell raw milk in New South Wales. Any idea where to get it? Oh, it's not. Look, it's illegal in the whole of Australia to sell raw milk, but there is a raw milk technology where they put it under a lot of pressure, and what they do is they break the cell membranes of the bacteria. The problem is you lose both the beneficial and any potential nasties, but you do get all the other nutrients, which is important. So it's not 100% like raw, but it is raw minus beneficial bacteria and potentially any pathogenics if they ever got in there. Unlikely, but you know what I mean. You still have to say that. But it's called Made by Cow. So Made by Cow is... Oops. And this is produced by a company in New South Wales. So if you're in Monstrosity 194, yep, there it is. Made by Cow is the... So I've just put that there. And I'll... Oh, God. that there is made by cow. And so that company there does actually produce these raw milk products. So basically it's it's cold pressed raw milk. The Jersey one is the one I get. And then there's the next one. There's what they call the full cream, but actually that is the one which has like your regular type cows, which have got A1 casein. If you're from Northern Europe, yeah, I'll leave it up to you whether I get the one the Jersey cow, which is more A2. And then they also have a cold pressed raw one where they've actually removed the lactose. And basically, yeah, so that's another option for people with lactose intolerance who want raw milk, because you get all the other nutrients minus the sugar. I think they actually use like some sort of thing that actually ferments away all the sugars. And then that's how they sort of remove it. And then they just basically put it through the device, which puts it under high pressure, which is 6 times the lowest, like I can't remember how many thousands meters into the ocean it would be equivalent. And then they basically put under a whole lot of pressure, 6 times the pressure at the lowest point of the Pacific Ocean, and actually bust the actual membranes. But it doesn't affect it in any other deleterious effects or the others. So you still get the lactoferrin, which has got all those other benefits, and a whole lot of other peptides and things that are still not lost. You still maintain the vitamin C isn't lost, and a whole lot of other things. B vitamins are not reduced, and neither are some of the other beneficial components. So yes, we do have this form of raw milk, and this is an Australian machine. So it's not like the raw milk approach, because what they do is they put it in these. You can see these containers here, and they put it into the machine. So it's already the raw milk is put into the actual bottles. Then it's placed in this machine that puts under the pressure. It doesn't go through piping. In the US, there is cold pressed elsewhere, but actually the milk is pushed through a whole lot of piping. Is actually forced. They chill it. They do certain things to in a similar way to affect it. Then they put it into the bottles after. This actually gets put into the bottles as it came out of the cow. So it's the cow to the bottle, then in the machine. So the only thing is the pressure that's been put on the bottle. They had to modify the bottle because they were having some issues with the production. It wasn't, so it was actually stuffing up some of their, and they had to take back some of their products. So they were having teething issues. They've changed the bottle structure now to allow for more even pressure to work better. So now they've eliminated the production problem that they were having. They had to change the bottle size. So it's it's a sort of a wider bottle rather than a longer, taller bottle than what it was in the past. That's why you can see this new form, if anybody remembers the old form. So yes, that's what's actually happened. So it's a completely different technology, so do not worry. And you can actually check the who actually said that? Yeah, the wholesale distributors. Yep, that's exactly, yep. And there's, see there, let me share it. Should have shown this before. There it is. Cow into the bottle, into the machine, and then the batch is tested before it's sent out. And that's traditional pasteurization and homogenization. Now they've got here, I think it's, so they've got the stockists. So you can go down here and you can actually put your location in. So as you can see, there are many places in New South Wales that actually, in Tasmania, there's only 2 places. So it's City Organic in Criterion Street. Have they updated their file? No, they've still got Umara down. They need to update that. They've got organic. No, that's the Launceston one, the organic grocer store. But they don't have the City Organic on their site yet. Now, Umara in Hobart, they actually stopped supplying it. But City Organic has still got it in Criterion Street, anybody that's in our area. So they're not keeping these up to date as well. So, but you can go in there and just find. So Sydney, you can see there's a lot of areas that have got it. So you can zoom in. So Woolworths Metro in Pendle Hill, so that actually has it. So even some Woolworths stores now are having it, like the regular supermarkets. So it's basically finding out exactly which ones have it and which ones don't and getting it. So yes, it is made by Cow, IGA, yeah, Foodland sells it. Thanks, Helen. Yeah, there you go. So there's a whole lot of areas. I'm going to quickly go through all this and see what I have missed. Yes. Also put in some the rhamnosus. I need to actually write all that as well down. It's one of those videos I just haven't got about. Can an athlete do alternative day fasting year round? Yeah. Following a species appropriate diet? Yep. Maintain a low body weight? Yep. It really depends. It depends on your physical activity. I always say to people, listen to your body. It's one thing that we don't do. I've always found that when you listen to your body and you eat appropriately, you usually get where you were. I mean, Kelly Hogan, she basically did just steaks only. She was just doing steaks only. She probably didn't have any genetics which affected her conversion of certain things like carotenoids and other things. And so she did really well. She just did steak onlys. I generally recommend for most people to do steak and eggs and to just let the body settle itself and sort itself out and listen to the body. If you're a bit more physically active, if you want to build more muscle, if you want to lose weight, it all depends on where you are. If you put yourself, you're having, just steaks, you will utilize more of if you're physically active, you'll utilize more of your own body fat. If you're actually doing fat bombs and a lot of butter and all that sort of stuff, well, you're going to be consuming a lot. You're not going to be using a lot from your own body. So I usually say to people, sort of simplify it. Yes, I do like cream in my coffee. Yes, I do like things like that. But when I want to cut, like the old bodybuilders did, you basically have to cut both the fat and the carbs and go higher protein. And in particular, protein, which is higher in leucine, because what you want to do is you want to lean out, maintain good body mass. And that body mass needs to have enough, the sort of anabolic amino acids like leucine to basically support it as you're leaning out, because you need to counteract the sort of catabolic effects of, releasing free fatty acids from your blood, from your fat cells by doing that. So, and that's how the old bodybuilders used to do. And they were able to rip themselves down and maintain muscle that they had built. So it's not magical, nothing out there. Some of us find it hard because, myself, ice cream, I do enjoy, I do like to eat a bit more fat than that sort of stuff. And so for me, it's more of a slow, more plateaus in between. But I accept that. I'm in my mid-50s. I've got some mitochondrial damage over many years. So it's much slower for other people. It depends what your goals are, what your priorities are in life in that regard. So I usually recommend that when people become moving into their 60s and beyond, that they don't go very lean, because it's not a good thing. The whole purpose of having that extra energy on board is it's protective. People that have a bit more fat, not excessive fat we're talking about, a bit more fat, they're not excessively lean, will live longer. Most populations, even tribal populations, you see them, they've got a little bit of fat stored in front. They're not completely ripped. They only get ripped in periods when they've got very little access to food, and then when they gorge on it to build up their fat stores again. So it depends what your goals are in life, and you'll adjust and make changes to, but I always say prioritize the protein and then adjust the energy substrates to basically how much do I have on board, how much do I want to maintain on board, how much do I want to remove, so it's all about energy management when it comes to, what adiposity you're going to have. But when it comes to muscle mass and all that, it's all about protein and leucine. So yes. I think I might take a break from a daily 30, 40 grams of liver. Good idea. Our ancestors never consumed that amount. It's usually about, they would have, even the Greeks, they would have liver, but they had occasional, like now and then. So it's a sort of a now and then sort of thing. And most they'd probably have about, small amount, like 10, 15 grams, and they'd share it amongst themselves. So they just cut a small slice off, so as a multivitamin type thing. But they were, again, if you're very nutrient deficient, then it's a good idea. I usually recommend people consume like 100 grams every second day for a couple of weeks, to get there, especially when they're very depleted. Depends, every circumstance is going to be different. It's like trying to think now, Terry Walls. Yeah, that's right. She had MS, and she basically hit the organ meats very heavy, large amounts and all that. And it pretty much fixed her deficiencies and restored her back to normal functioning over time. So, and then she had to ease off. So, yes. Nope, absolutely not. It's a myth. It's garbage. I have a video on this channel that talks about the magnesium requirements and the excretion. So if you basically Google Harry Serpanos magnesium, you'll find the video, and it actually explains the exact amount that you secrete and you get rid of. Now, if you're not getting enough sodium, enough salt, and you've got low insulin, you'll basically dump more fluids and dump more electrolytes. That's when you can actually create a deficiency in that transition period. Also, because people are consuming far too much water, which is high in deuterium. Tribal people do not consume water. People need to get this thing out of their head. You hydrate with fat. You do not hydrate with water. You only require very small amounts of water in terms of hydration. You don't require massive amounts like people are consuming nowadays. That's what caused a lot of these electrolyte issues and dumping of a lot of electrolytes far excessively than you need. You basically need sodium, salt. The body will dump excess salt as long as there's not high insulin. If there's high insulin, it will retain sodium. That's when it becomes a problem. That's when people eat too many carbohydrates. They've got high insulin. Walter Kempner, back in the 1930s, showed that quite clear that you, on a high carbohydrate, high insulin inducing diet, you need to get rid of all electrolytes because you're retaining a lot of fluids and those minerals, and very hard to excrete sufficiently on a very high carbohydrate diet. His was like 94%. It was for a specific therapeutic approach. But yeah, the reality is he only provided iron as a supplement for those people for that year. Magnesium is not required, and I find that many people that use magnesium and unbalance their electrolytes tend to basically get a lot of cramps, and when people put more sodium in, they basically eliminate the cramps, because I've made that mistake myself in the past. So, if I'm basically getting any cramps, which I haven't had a cramp now for ages, I know that I'm low in sodium. I listen to my body. So when I'm actually, let's say I'm cooking a steak or whatever, I'll put some salt and then I'll go, oh, this is a bit too salty. I know that I've, my body's retaining. I'll ease off on the salt for a couple of days. Other times, I feel, I need a bit more. And my body's really regulated now really well. I'm not dumping. I'm not going to the toilet continually. I urinate, a couple of times a day. I'm not constantly urinating like I was in the past as well. I had periods, and other people have had even more severe periods. If you get all the nutrients in, check those videos on potassium and all that, and you eat those foods, animal foods that give you sufficient, and your excretion rate is less, and you're getting enough sodium to balance and maintain, that recycling effect that happens in the kidneys, then you're fine. Because actually even magnesium gets to some extent recycled. But it all has to do with balancing. If you reduce some of the other electrolytes, what you do is you have to bring all the other stuff down to balance the stuff, to get homeostasis. But the body's able to dump really easy sodium. So you basically get all the other stuff. It reduces only small amounts of excretes that you don't need, or it doesn't take up. There's these metalloproteins in the enteric side, in your gut lining. And what it does is these are regulated by nutrient sensors that work out how much you've taken in, and it will take in and all that. All these in a proper functioning body work. It's only when, it's like manganese or aluminium or a number of things. If you've got a good functioning gallbladder, up to over 90% of manganese can actually get excreted. But if you don't have good functioning, because you've been on a kibble diet for a very long time, then you can actually have manganese toxicity. That's what a lot of plant-based people end up having, because they don't use it or lose it. And the thing that emulsifies the bile, which is really important, MK4, which is a fat-soluble vitamin, which is K2 from the animal foods, it has to be K7. A third of the population can't even convert it, so it's a waste of time. natto is crap. But MK4 can actually have direct effect on the genes. It's the only menoquinone that can, of the K2s, but also can actually affect the transcription factors that are involved in the bile synthesis and in bile production, plus the emulsification capacity of taurine, which also helps in stomach acidity as well, but also in stomach function. That's in meat. It's in fish, seafood as well. Actually, in seafood, slightly more. And that will also help for all these functions. It's really think holistically. Don't think reductionist like a lot of these people think. Think about all these things that have to be in homeostasis and interact and work together. That's why when you're eating a species-appropriate diet, I usually have the saying that many of my followers, Kayla, that follow me know salt, sun, salt, and meat. So 10 years ago, in my mid-40s, I had cardiovascular disease, and I hit the books and tried to find out exactly how to reverse everything. I got rid of all my fibrosis out of my basically heart, and that taurine helped for that. It also breaks down fibrotic tissue and all soft tissue, like, but also iodine helps as well. I did use iodine. And the other thing is, but I balanced it with selenium, very important. Eggs are a very good source of selenium. So is liver and a number of other things, animal foods, some of the crustaceans you'll find as well. So it really, eat a mixed variety of animal foods. It's much nicer that way. Just eating steak all the day would bore the living daylights out of me. I eat a whole lot of variety of foods, scallops and oysters and clams, and I make soups with mussels, and I basically warm up. I'll actually beat a couple of eggs, and then I'll actually put warm water from the actual soup into the eggs, beat that up until it comes to the same temperature, then combine it so it doesn't solidify. It's a trick that I learned from my younger sister. So there's all these techniques where you can actually really make really nice nutrient-dense foods that have got all these micronutrients, and you don't need to supplement. A lot of supplements also can cause, because they come in excessive amounts and they don't come in the right quantities or the right, sometimes they don't even have the right ionization, because there's these metalloproteins, that negative charge has to be right in order to be able to attract and take in. So there's all these complications. The reason why a lot of supplements are just junk, it's a waste of money. And the only time I actually supplement people with have got a lot of deficiencies is with high amounts. And I actually don't encourage them to even supplement with a lot of the standard stuff. I do talk about colloidal minerals, which have got the right ionic structure. So they can be used, and that's the only type of mineral supplement that I do believe in. And then there is also the other way of actually just organ meats. What's wrong with organ meats? I probably have to, I've talked about one of my sort of recipes where you basically, in milk, raw milk, you cut thin strips of liver, you put it in, you soak it, and you put rosemary in there. Shitloads of rosemary, takes in the flavor of the rosemary, and then you bake it. And you create these sticks. Now, obviously you lose some of the other vitamins, but you don't lose the minerals, I can tell you. And they are like, liver sticks, and they are really nice and tasty. They can be quite addictive, so don't overdo the rosemary. But yeah, look, people just have this sort of really reductionist way in viewing minerals, and it creates a lot of imbalances in a lot of people. I don't recommend people supplement minerals unless they're actually supplementing trace minerals. If they're basically putting their water through, what do they call those filters? The this type of filters, water filters. I usually get a colloidal mineral. I get a King Island colloidal mineral, which is got in Tasmania. So there's a sort of an organic outlet that does provide it down here. And there's also Nature's Work as well, which is a more commercial type outlet, but they have it as well. And it's really, that would be the only thing that I would use. So, yeah. Look, check out some of my other stuff. I hope you find things that are interesting. So, this old fella, this 55-year-old, still comes up with some good stuff. That's about it. I hope you get some value out of my site, my channel. Sure. Vitamin D, state-of-the-art lecture from 5 years ago. Excellent. Goes on for one about associated edema-free, worth a look. Okay. Send me an email. I'll take a look and see what they have to say. Sometimes I do find, I've looked at stuff on vitamin D and all that, and I'll go through the enzymes, all the enzymes that are affected through a specific pathway, And usually I'll realize that sometimes there are other elements that they've missed. So I think very differently. I basically, a lot of people, I go through all the enzymes and then I consider all, how much is needed throughout the body for all these enzymes to work properly, for what other cofactors and other things. And then I look at the foods, and that's how I sort of worked out how to play around with foods and stuff, combinations to get those better results. Well, it works for me anyway. So, look, it depends how old you are. If you're young, you're still biosynthesizing quite a bit. So you may have down-regulated the biosynthesis because if you're not devox, because you haven't been on an appropriate diet for a long time, that can be an issue. So then I usually start people on with about 2 grams. If people are basically older, I usually get them slightly up to 3. You can go up to 10, but it depends on the circumstances. And also, it does lower blood pressure. So when it comes to young people, I only recommend 1. If anybody's on blood pressure meds, do not supplement taurine until you manage your blood pressure meds. So you start with 1 gram, then you go and check with your physician and get your blood pressure meds adjusted down, and then you increase by 1 gram. If you feel a bit dizzy, you stop it. You go back to the 1 gram and consider reducing your blood pressure meds a bit more. So eventually you can potentially get off blood pressure meds entirely with taurine. But you can actually get off blood pressure meds as well entirely if you basically stop the kibble diet, kibble eating, and engaging the Randall cycle. So that as well. But just anyone that's listening to this, taurine does lower blood pressure. So does L-citrulline that I've referred to, which is a vasodilator that increases nitric oxide. So you need to keep this in mind if you're on blood pressure meds. Taking any of these amino acid type supplements can be an issue. So you need to basically make adjustments and use a good physician that knows his stuff. Now, with MK4, we have no idea. Absolutely no idea. We've seen mega dosing, like 45. Like if you eat food, you'll get in the range of, a few hundred micrograms. Maybe you'll get to 1 milligram if you really eat foods that are very high. Now, there's a Carlson brand that actually on iHerb that actually sells the 5 milligram one. And then there's the advanced orthomolecular product, which they have a K2, which is up to 45 milligrams. I know that the Japanese did decalcifying studies. That means studies where and the Dutch as well, to decalcify the blood vessels in the heart, in the soft tissue, so to speak. And they used 45, 3 times a day, 45 milligrams. So really high doses, mega doses, no toxicity whatsoever. And they saw decalcification, rapid decalcification of these tissues. It's the thing that I've actually used taurine a couple of grams. I'm down to 2 grams now, but I was using up to 5 grams. And that helped decalcify. Now, I do need to go and actually get my tested. Because remember, I told you guys that my left lung was completely glassed a couple of years back. Now that's down to a very small percentage. That was back in 19 that I did that test. And now it's 3 years later. And my doctor wants me to go back and see whether it's reduced, like the heart actually cleared up. Now, what's happened with the actual, so I need to go back and find out. So I'm just glad that that taurine has cleared so much, because when you've got so much glassing, there's a risk of cancer. So that was one of my big fears, my old smoking days, basically. that's where a lot of that damage to my lungs came from. I can tell you now, I've got a lot of, I mean, I walk up here, as a Hello Kitty knows, I walk up these long, big, steep hills. I don't even pant. I'm fine all the way up. So my lung capacity is way better and in a much better state. But I put it down to taurine playing a big role in clearing up a lot of that damage that I did over multiple decades of eating very inappropriate things and doing a lot of very inappropriate things like heavy drinking and smoking. So let's say I did a lot of damage, and I look now younger than what I looked when I was in my mid-40s. So, and now I'm in my mid-50s. And that's because I've reversed a lot of the damage. There's still a lot of damage. I mean, I don't know whether I can reverse all of it. It's not like being on an ancestral diet from birth to death. You know, most of us have basically done, you know, particularly me, debauchery of, lifestyle in a sense, and caused myself plenty of cellular damage. And now I'm trying to find ways of turning it back using Pfizer senolytics to kill off the senescent, the old cells, so they never become cancerous or problematic, doing all these strategies. So it's a long way back to health. And, and I do cheat, as you guys know, and we're human. We all do. It's just trying to minimize that sort of stuff. And trying to control that. It's not easy in the food environment, the culture that we live in. It's not an easy thing, and I sympathize with everyone in that regard. It's just basically trying to, when you feel lousy, just remind yourself, don't do that stuff. You know how you feel. So, yeah. John, have you ever thought how to get rid of variable debris for COVID long haulers? I've talked about that. I've talked about using ivermectin, using basically, because ivermectin, what it does is has an ability, which is a really good thing, to slow down replication, but also has an ability to deal with a lot of the sort of derangements that can actually happen. When you get a lot of inflammation that's caused, you can also get some of the immune system compromising, and you can get some derangements. Ivermectin seems to be able to deal with suppressing some of this sort of stuff. The other thing that regulates the immune system really well and reduces these sort of complications of both clotting factors and the complications of, you could say, things that that basically are causing sort of autoimmune type behaviors, is a well-regulated immune system. And there, vitamin D plays a big role. So maintaining a good vitamin D status. If you take a look at tribal societies, I talk about Mary Ruddock, where she looked at the kids that were actually living away from the village, and the children there were actually eating seed oils and refined, the government, seed oils and flour. I mean, how crazy is that? And these children, when they came back to the village, they were more susceptible to pathogens in the environment, where the kids that were already there weren't. They were on an ancestral diet. So they had a more robust immune system, one, because they were outdoors getting enough, because dark skin, vitamin D, if you're indoors, for dark skinned people, is a really bad thing. If you're not supplementing vitamin D, you're going to be vitamin D deficient very quickly. So these kids were very vitamin D deficient over time by being in that environment. They probably weren't aware of it, what the cause was. They were just describing this to Mary, who was doing research on the Maasai and a number of other tribal populations. And they were explaining, what they've noticed, this difference between their children and the children that are in the village. It's, again, because those kids are outdoors getting good vitamin D status. The other ones are indoors or in dormitories or whatever in the cities. Not enough. This is a big problem with people with darker skin, especially in Africa now that they're urbanizing rapidly. It's going to be a big bloody. You're going to see an explosion in both disease and vitamin D deficiencies in Africa as a consequence of that. It's already happening in some cities, like Nairobi and some South African cities. It's been happening for some time, but it will become more pronounced in that part of the world. It's the other reason why darker skinned people had more problems with COVID. Up in Sweden, about 70% of the people, they represent less than 1% of the population, the people from the Horn of Africa, and about 70% was the mortality coming directly from that group. And the rest were old people who were Swedes, but they had comorbidities and other issues. But the majority were coming from this population. Again, vitamin D is the issue here. So I think that vitamin D status is a very important thing if you're going to deal with long COVID. Ivermectin is another thing. Quercetin and zinc, species appropriate diet, getting enough zinc in that regard. Those sort of getting good food is going to basically have a big difference. Methylators, depending on your genes. I mean, I've got certain genes that basically choline is very important. My genes don't really work really well in that regard because I'm supposed to get it from the diet. So I also do recommend people take some choline because it also is a methyl donor, can help certain people. Let's put it this way. You're not going to lose. It's a good thing to export fat out of the liver as well, and it will basically improve the liver functioning, which is another issue that some of these people have. That's the sort of stuff that I would be doing, but I would prioritize. At the top of that list would be vitamin D, ivermectin if you can get it, and other things below that. We haven't really worked out a lot of the protocols yet. There's some doctors in the US that are using ivermectin, using vitamin D, and using a couple of other things, but it's a mixed bag, and I think the reason for it is the low vitamin D that they're actually giving them. They're only giving them a couple of IUs, a couple of thousand IUs, and I'm going, that's just too low. When your immune system is being continually basically sensitized because of these inflammatory, because of you've still got this material in there, you've got an immune system that's actually not regulated properly, so you've got these sort of a lot of these cells that still have a number of the viral components, and they're creating a certain level of immuno effects in the body. Well, you need a well-regulated immune system to basically sort that out. And 1,000 IUs isn't going to, or 2,000 IUs is just too damn low. You really need to get up to 10,000 to 20,000 for a certain period of time. You really need to saturate the body with, because a lot of these people are usually vitamin D deficient historically. So they've got to have very low stores. Giving them that small amount when the immune system is upregulated and requires a lot, it's coated with a lot of vitamin D receptors. If you're not getting enough, you're just not going to be optimal, and you're going to be dragging this problem for longer. That's my personal belief. I've seen it from my own partner when she got COVID. She was sick as a dog. She thought she was going to die. She was, in bed. She was really in a bad state. She could hardly speak. She was basically, next stop was ICU. I can tell you, ICU in Indonesia is a death sentence. And I got her father to basically get her vitamin D 10,000 IU injection, the active, the stored form, so she could then, through her kidneys, activate it, and liver. She did that. The next day she was out of bed. It's like miraculous, you would say. When the previous day she was like, I'm on death's door, and the next day she's out of bed. And then she took another one 2 days later, the third day, and then I insisted she take one on the sixth day, which she didn't want to spend money, but I insisted, and she did. So, and then she went back to Bali from Java, and then basically the authorities there pressured her to have one of the COVID jabs, and she was an absolute sick as a dog because she got an overreaction of the immune system. And yeah, she was absolutely sick as a dog for a couple of days. And I told her to go and get some vitamin D, and it settled her down after that. So I've seen an N of 1 work really well with vitamin D. She wasn't able to access ivermectin because it'd been sold out. People just had gone around just buying it from all the different pharmacies. And I think some of the pharmacists themselves probably kept it for themselves as well because they couldn't get supplies. So, yeah. So, John, I would say, yes, keep your vitamin D levels up, and cheers to you as well. Yep, definitely. Whole eggs. Versus egg yolks. No, it's only the whites I'm concerned about. Only the whites in the raw form. Let's not forget the whites also have a lot of the collagen type proteins, amino acids. So that can be really good for the gut. So where the eggs have got the yolk has got more biotin, it's got it also has some aminos, but also has a lot of the fat soluble vitamins, MK4, and a whole lot of other things. And the whites have got more sort of, you could say, the collagen type aminos. So it's a really nice combination. Let's put it that way. It's also got, yeah, because you take a look at the leg of a chicken or any poultry. It's really, the collagen fibers are really, really good in that regard. So in that egg white, you do find things like hyaluronic acid and other things like that. So you do find elements or components that are really good for collagen. That's why it's really good for healing the gut as well. The old method with having eggs. So it's really, and also the bioavailability of the protein in eggs is extremely high. And the compared, I mean, when you're looking at the utilization is 49%. The utilization of meat is 32%. Obviously, that can be slightly biohacked with additional taurine and leucine supplementation. You can sort of get around that in particular. There are ways, but yeah. But I would say there are more benefits you'll get. And Shell agrees with me. And remember and as Shell would also remember, the guy that actually consumed 25 eggs a day, he had an addiction. He used to do it for multiple decades, outlived his parents as well. He was 88 years old back in 1996. And the old geezer was doing bloody wonderful. So, anyway, guys, I'm going to pull the pin. I do have to put Hello Kitty on the. Yes, I did get to you eventually. I know it's, I've been slow. Oh, you went to the market, farmers markets. Oh, okay, new place for steak. Okay. Okay. Okay, we'll have a conversation after. Okay, so you've found new fatty burgers, fattier than the other guys that were supplying us. Okay, we'll talk. This is a very important things. Yeah, that's the one. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, Herpes simplex. That you get in. Yeah, they go in hiding in remission, and then they basically can come out again. Yes. So, that was the thing. So, things have different types of strategies. Yes, the adenoviruses. Actually, they very much they cause a lot of clotting factors in young children. A lot of children are if the mother, usually you get the adenoviruses from your mother. We've still got adenoviruses in us, so we actually can pass to the mothers can pass it to the children. And if the children don't have a well because they've had low vitamin D, they don't have a well-regulated immune system. Some of them are susceptible due to certain genetics to basically getting a really bad reaction and severe clotting factors. They've got those clotting genes, and those children do die in early age, and they can be very much a medical emergency. So there's a lot of literature. Remember the studies that I showed you when I was doing that, looking at the clotting factors for adenoviruses, 275, and they're all related to early childhood and all that. So we've known for a long, long time about adenoviruses being problematic and causing clotting factors. So why the hell are we using them in this way is beyond me. Anyway, we've had our fun. We've said our stuff. Indy, good to see you here. Hi as well. Now, I haven't been able to cover everyone, unfortunately. We ran out of time. And what was this? What was Helen saying? Oh, I'll just say that. Yes. Exactly. I feel the same way, Dina. Absolutely the same way about, it's just taking far too bloody long. Yeah, I know. I'm not happy about it either. So it's like becoming crunch time and everybody's sort of on tenterhooks. So I know the feeling. A Greek friend says, if you want to think in a simplistic level, he uses English. If he wants to think deeply, he uses Greek. After all, mathematics, philosophy is the language of the Greeks. Thanks, Ellen. Actually, I did learn most of my philosophy in Greek. And I can think in both languages. So I grew up in both societies. And so I've got the ability, like a split personality. I can be Greek and my mannerisms are very different. And I can be very English, and my mannerisms are different. I actually grew up with a lot of kids, Anglo-Australian kids. I used to stay at their homes and stuff like that. So I had a lot of interactions with both Greek kids and Anglo kids from a very young age. And as a consequence, I became very fluent in both languages, and I can just switch between them on a dime. There's no translation. It's just there's one language and then there's the other language type approach. I'm just born in both languages in a sense. And but I have to say that I can actually think in both languages. I do have a very deep knowledge in both languages. Where I do get caught up sometimes is when there's certain words that I learned or certain stuff that I learned in Greek or in the English speaking part of the world, and you could say, I can understand in a much deeper way that one language or the other. I know it sounds strange, but it's sort of like I had a more nuanced understanding in one language and more nuanced understanding in another language. I know it's weird, but yeah. Yes. So yeah, that's about it. I'm gonna pull the plug. Did I actually miss any of Lukey's? I'll have to go over it again, find out whether I did or didn't. But I will basically, in about, so it's 2:00 now. So basically in about 4 hours from now, we will have the next live stream. So right after when this finishes, it'll actually just sort of bring up so you can click on that and have it just in the background sitting until the next one turns up. Well, thank you everyone for being here. I appreciate it, and I will see you lovely people next week. Yes, made by cow. Yes, Coles too. Ah, okay. Thanks, Warhead. I didn't realise that Coles had it as well. But there you go, people. Coles has it as well in Australia, not only some of the Woolworths. So go to that site and look at and see which ones have it and which ones don't. It's a nice product. I enjoy it. I wish they would actually make a kefir. They haven't, sort of. I mean, you can use that milk to make a kefir of your own in that regard. So it's always a problem trying to get some of this sort of stuff down here. Yes, but otherwise, I will see you lovely people next week who are in North America because you'll be asleep. And anybody who's basically a straggler from the British Isles who is here, I'll see you later. That means you're going to go to bed and then you'll wake up very early and probably see me then. So I will basically see you early in your morning, late in my evening. So thanks for being here, guys. Appreciate it. I wish I could have answered some. I know I've missed some questions. I do apologize. Sometimes it's just takes too long. Got to get them in early, guys. Got to get them in early because the earlier they are, the more likely they'll get answered. If you know, it's the way it is. So unfortunately, there's only so many hours that I can do this for. And I'm going to go for a bit. Don't know what I'm going to do. Yeah, I'm going to have a bit of a break. Let's put it that way. But what was that? We'll ask you the questions again tomorrow. Oh, yeah. Okay. Figure HD, get some sleep later today. Yeah, later today in my case. Yeah, so get some sleep and do come and ask me whatever and all that. Just get your questions in early. And I will see you lovely people. Thank you. And before you go, please hit the like button. And if you haven't subscribed, why not? I'm an interesting character. Please do. Anyway, and if you're a Vagoon out there and you didn't like this content, please dislike me. See yous.